The Eurasian steppe, stretching from the northern Black Sea across southern Russia and into Central Asia, provided the environmental foundation for early nomadic societies that would eventually evolve into the Scythians. Archaeological surveys indicate that by the 9th century BCE, this region was characterized by expansive grasslands, seasonal river valleys, and a continental climate with cold winters and warm summers. Such conditions favored mobile pastoralism over sedentary agriculture, prompting communities to adopt flexible subsistence strategies. Archaeologists have identified early Kurgan burials associated with the Srubna and Andronovo cultures, which provide material evidence of both social stratification and early horse domestication. Anthony, 2007, Mallory, 1998. These sites demonstrate that early steppe populations were already developing complex cultural and ritual systems, evidenced by grave goods that include bronze weapons, ceramic vessels, and ornaments. Records indicate that the domestication and use of horses played a central role in shaping these societies. Archaeozoological analysis from sites in the northern Pontic region shows horse remains with bit wear, suggesting controlled riding and possibly early mounted warfare. Outram et al., 2009. The mobility afforded by horses allowed these communities to exploit dispersed pastures, coordinate seasonal migrations, and maintain trade and communication networks across hundreds of kilometers of steppe terrain. From a systemic perspective, this adaptation illustrates how geography and climate directly influenced both economic subsistence and the eventual social organization of Proto-Scythian groups. Material culture from this period also reflects increasing social differentiation. Kurgans varied in size and complexity, with larger mounds containing richer assemblages, including bronze axes, decorated ceramics, and ornaments made of semi-precious stones. Archaeologists interpret these disparities as evidence of hierarchical organization and emergent elite structures. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Such stratification indicates that even in highly mobile societies, social authority could consolidate through control over ritual practices, wealth, and resource allocation. This transition from loosely organized tribal groups to more structured communities demonstrates the interplay between environmental constraints and social innovation. The broader Eurasian context further influenced the development of these early nomads. Trade networks connecting the steppe to agricultural societies in the Near East and the Black Sea region allowed for the exchange of metals, textiles, and finished goods. Excavations at sites in southern Russia have uncovered imported bronze items and Greek pottery fragments, indicating sustained contact with sedentary neighbors. Chernik, 1992. These interactions provided both material resources and technological knowledge that reinforced social hierarchies and prepared the stage for more complex political organization. Analytical studies suggest that access to such trade networks could amplify both wealth and influence, allowing steppe communities to extend their reach and coordinate larger-scale activities. Interpretive insights from this period emphasize three key dynamics. First, environmental determinism shaped the fundamental structure of early Scythian society, as mobility was necessary for economic survival. Second, the emergence of hierarchical burials and material differentiation illustrates the capacity for social stratification in non-sedentary contexts. Third, early trade and technological exchange demonstrate that even geographically expansive nomadic populations could integrate into broader Eurasian systems, establishing long-term regional influence. Together, these forces provided the structural foundation for the emergence of the Scythians as a distinct and cohesive culture. By the end of the 8th century BCE, these Proto-Scythian communities had solidified patterns of mobility, social hierarchy, and ritual practice that would persist and evolve. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these early steppe societies were laying the groundwork for more centralized leadership and cultural cohesion, setting the stage for the Scythians' rise as a dominant power across the Pontic steppe. The next phase in their development involved the crystallization of a distinct ethnic identity and material culture, marking the transition from dispersed nomadic clans to an organized and recognizable Scythian population. By the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, the diverse nomadic communities of the Eurasian steppe were consolidating into a recognizable Scythian identity. Archaeologists have traced this process through distinctive material culture, burial practices, and the distribution of Kurgan cemeteries across the northern Pontic region, southern Russia, and western Kazakhstan, Koryakova Pimikov, 2007. The term Scythian first appears in Greek sources, most notably in the works of Herodotus, who describes them as a people occupying the Pontic steppe and distinguished by horse-based mobility, martial skill, and specific cultural practices. These early textual references corroborate the archaeological evidence of ethnogenesis, providing a combined material and literary perspective on Scythian identity formation. Analysis of burial mounds from this period reveals a consistent pattern of grave goods, including bronze weapons, gold ornaments, and functional items such as harness fittings and combs. Excavations at the Kurgans near the Don and Dnieper rivers indicate that elite individuals were often interred with full horse skeletons, suggesting both status and a symbolic connection to mobility and warfare. Jacobson, 1995. The inclusion of animal motifs in metalwork and jewelry, later recognized as the characteristic Scythian animal style, demonstrates the emergence of a shared visual language across widely dispersed communities. This standardization in art and burial practice reflects not only aesthetic preference but also the consolidation of social norms and identity markers across the steppe. Interpretive analysis suggests that ethnogenesis was closely linked to the development of social hierarchies and ritual authority. Larger kurgans and more elaborate grave goods indicate the presence of emergent elites who exercised both economic and ceremonial influence within their communities. Records indicate that these elite structures likely coordinated seasonal migrations, organized military expeditions, and mediated interactions with neighboring peoples. Chernik, 1992. From a systemic perspective, this demonstrates how mobility did not preclude social centralization. Rather, hierarchical authority adapted to the nomadic environment, consolidating power while maintaining flexibility. Metalworking and material production also played a central role in cultural unification. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of advanced bronze smithing techniques, including complex weaponry, horse trappings, and decorative items. Some artifacts show evidence of long-distance trade, with stylistic influences from Near Eastern and Greek designs. Anthony, 2007. Such interactions suggest that early Scythians were not isolated. Rather, they participated in a broader Eurasian exchange network that provided access to metal resources, finished goods, and technical knowledge. This integration into regional trade systems enhanced both material wealth and cultural cohesion, reinforcing the emerging Scythian identity. The consolidation of Scythian culture can also be observed through settlement and mobility patterns. Seasonal encampments along river valleys indicate that communities were strategically positioned to exploit grazing lands while maintaining access to trade routes. Archaeological survey data suggests that these settlements were deliberately oriented, with certain sites reserved for communal or ritual activities, reflecting the interplay between environment, economy, and social structure. This organization allowed for coordinated movement across the steppe and facilitated interactions both within and between Scythian groups, further strengthening collective identity. 3 analytical observations can be drawn from this period of ethnogenesis. First, the emergence of consistent artistic and burial practices demonstrates the formation of a shared cultural framework, essential for identity consolidation across a geographically dispersed population. Second, the rise of elite structures indicates that social stratification could coexist with mobility, allowing for centralized authority without fixed territorial control. Third, participation in regional trade networks shows that early Scythians were integrated into broader economic and cultural systems, enabling them to accumulate wealth and influence without adopting sedentary agricultural practices. These factors collectively illustrate how Scythian identity was constructed through the combination of material culture, social hierarchy, and interregional connectivity. By the end of the 7th century BCE, the Scythians had established the core elements of their cultural and social identity: a shared visual language, elite-controlled ritual practices, and a networked economy. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these developments set the stage for more complex political organization and regional influence. As the steppe communities transitioned from loosely connected clans to a more cohesive people, The next phase involved the formalization of political leadership and the emergence of chieftainship structures that would define early Scythian governance. Leadership on the steppe demanded both strength in battle and skill in diplomacy. By the late 8th and early 7th centuries BCE, Scythian society had begun to formalize structures of authority to manage increasingly complex social and economic interactions. Archaeological evidence from Kurgan cemeteries demonstrates variation in size and richness of burial goods, suggesting the emergence of tribal elites and chieftainship within broader clan networks. Koryakova Pimakov, 2007. These elites likely coordinated seasonal migrations, controlled the distribution of resources such as livestock and metal tools, and oversaw ceremonial practices, consolidating social cohesion among mobile populations. Herodotus notes that the Scythians were organized into tribes led by kings or chief warlords, indicating that even in highly decentralized steppe environments, recognized leadership roles were essential for governance and external negotiation. Clan-based structures remained fundamental to Scythian political organization. Archaeologists have identified clusters of kurgans corresponding to particular lineages, indicating that extended families maintained territorial continuity across seasonal ranges. This pattern allowed individual clans to retain autonomy while contributing to collective action, such as coordinated raids or defense against rival nomadic groups. Studies of kurgan distribution suggest that these networks were organized around natural resources, particularly river valleys and grazing areas, which acted as both logistical hubs and social centers. The combination of decentralized clan authority and emergent elite leadership illustrates how mobility shaped a flexible yet hierarchical political system capable of coordinating large-scale activity across hundreds of kilometers of steppe terrain. Military capability was integral to political authority. Steppe mobility and horsemanship allowed chieftains to project power across dispersed populations and secure influence over neighboring groups. Herodotus records instances of Scythian confederations mobilizing for campaigns against other nomads or against Persian incursions, demonstrating that coordinated military action was a central function of early political leadership. Archaeological analysis of weapons, including composite bows and bronze spearheads, supports these accounts, showing that martial capacity was closely tied to social status and authority. Jacobson, 1995. The systemic relationship between mobility, military organization, and governance indicates that political structures evolved to optimize the advantages of the steppe environment rather than replicate sedentary models of centralized authority. Economic control also reinforced emerging hierarchies. Chieftains oversaw pastoral production, tribute from subordinate clans, and trade with neighboring sedentary communities, particularly Greek colonies along the northern Black Sea. Archaeological finds of imported Greek pottery and metal items in kurgans suggest that elite leaders facilitated and regulated access to these goods, enhancing their authority and legitimizing social stratification. This link between economic management and political control exemplifies how resource distribution and trade networks were embedded in the early governance structures of Scythian society, enabling leaders to maintain influence across dispersed and mobile populations. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this phase of early political organization. First, the combination of clan autonomy and centralized elite authority demonstrates the adaptability of nomadic political systems to environmental constraints. Second, military capability was not only a means of defense or expansion but also a primary source of legitimacy and social cohesion. Third, economic oversight by chieftains shows that governance was closely tied to both internal resource management and external interactions, integrating Scythian communities into broader Eurasian networks. Together, these factors reveal that early political structures were carefully calibrated to balance mobility, cohesion, and strategic influence. By the early 7th century BCE, these developments had established a functional framework for Scythian governance. Clan-based hierarchies, supported by chieftain authority and reinforced through military and economic control, provided stability while allowing for mobility across the steppe. Records and archaeological evidence indicate that these early political arrangements laid the foundation for subsequent social and cultural consolidation. With chieftains gaining authority, Scythians developed religious and cultural systems to unify their people, setting the stage for the next phase of identity formation and material expression. Life and death were inseparable for a people whose graves were monuments to the heavens. Scythian cosmology, as recorded by Herodotus and corroborated through extensive archaeological evidence, centered on a dualistic understanding of the natural and spiritual worlds. Steppe societies recognized both celestial and terrestrial forces, often personified in deities or symbolic representations. Archaeologists have identified animal motifs, stags, panthers, and griffins, on weapons, ornaments, and burial items, suggesting that Scythians viewed the natural world as imbued with spiritual significance. Kozlov, 1977. These motifs, which later became known as the animal style, appear consistently across Kurgan burials from the 7th to 3rd centuries BCE, indicating a shared religious and cultural framework among dispersed clans. Burial practices provide the clearest evidence of Scythian religious beliefs. Kurgans frequently contained not only the deceased but also sacrificial offerings, including horses, weapons, and personal adornments. Excavations in the Don, Dnieper, and Lower Volga regions reveal graves in which the deceased was accompanied by sacrificed attendants or animals, reflecting the belief that such provisions were necessary for the journey into the afterlife. Jacobson, 1995. Herodotus describes these rituals in detail, noting that the Scythians performed elaborate ceremonies to honor the dead, combining feasting, sacrifices, and the construction of monumental earthworks. The scale and uniformity of these practices suggest a codified system of ritual authority, likely administered by elite leaders to reinforce social cohesion. Interpretive analysis indicates that religious practices served multiple systemic functions. First, they reinforced social hierarchy by distinguishing elites from commoners through the scale and richness of grave goods. Larger kurgans, containing gold ornaments, decorated weapons, and multiple sacrifices, clearly demarcate the status of individuals within tribal structures. Second, these rituals provided a framework for collective identity, uniting clans across the steppe through shared ceremonial norms and cosmological understanding. Finally, religious observance had practical implications, regulating seasonal migrations, warfare, and alliances. For example, ritual calendars may have coordinated livestock movements and raids, integrating spiritual authority with logistical governance. Scythian cosmology also extended into daily life and material culture. The prevalence of animal imagery on everyday items, from belt buckles to drinking vessels, reflects a pervasive integration of religious symbolism. These artifacts indicate that belief systems were not confined to elite or ceremonial spaces but permeated social and economic interactions. Archaeologists have noted patterns in the selection of specific animals, such as predatory cats or horses, which likely symbolized martial prowess, fertility, or divine protection. This integration of symbolism into material culture demonstrates how Scythian religious thought was embedded within broader social and political structures, rather than being a separate domain. Trade and interaction with neighboring societies further shaped Scythian religious expression. Greek colonies along the northern Black Sea, including Olbia and Chersonesus, provide evidence of imported ceremonial goods, such as pottery and metal vessels, found in Kurgan burials. These items, incorporated into local rituals, suggest selective adaptation and the exchange of symbolic practices between sedentary and nomadic communities. Anthony, 2007. This process reinforced the social authority of elites, as the ability to acquire and integrate foreign ritual objects enhanced prestige and consolidated political influence. 3 analytical observations emerge from the study of Scythian cosmology and rituals. First, the consistent use of animal symbolism and sacrificial practices demonstrates a codified religious system that contributed to social cohesion across a geographically dispersed population. Second, elite control over ritual activity illustrates how spiritual authority underpinned political hierarchy and resource distribution. Third, integration of imported goods into ceremonial contexts highlights the interaction between material culture, belief, and regional trade networks. Together, these insights show that religion was a structural force, shaping both internal organization and external relations. By the early 6th century BCE, Scythian religious practices had become deeply institutionalized, reinforcing social hierarchy and political authority while uniting diverse clans under a common cosmology. Records and archaeological evidence indicate that these systems also influenced Scythian diplomacy and economic exchange with neighboring sedentary communities. Religious authority, intertwined with social and military structures, provided the foundation upon which subsequent developments in Scythian art, economy, and external relations would build. Religious practices reinforced social hierarchy and influenced Scythian interactions with neighbors, setting the stage for the development of material culture as both an artistic and political expression. Every horse, every predator etched in gold told a story of power, belief, and mobility. Scythian visual culture, most prominently expressed through the animal style, provides a distinctive lens for understanding their social, political, and spiritual organization. Emerging in the 7th century BCE and flourishing through the 3rd century BCE, animal style motifs are characterized by dynamic depictions of predators, stags, felines, birds of prey, engaged in combat, predation, or movement. Archaeological evidence from kurgans in Ukraine, southern Russia, and Crimea demonstrates that this art appeared across multiple mediums, including metalwork, horse harnesses, jewelry, and textiles, indicating both widespread cultural significance and the diffusion of stylistic conventions across the Pontic steppe. Kozlov, 1977, Jacobson, 1995. The distribution and complexity of animal-style artifacts reveal their function as markers of social status and identity. Excavations of elite burials show that high-ranking individuals were interred with intricately decorated weapons, pectorals, and ornamental belts featuring these motifs. For example, the Soloka kurgan in southern Ukraine contained gold plaques depicting predatory animals in combat, suggesting that mastery over or association with these forces symbolized martial prowess and social authority. Pierce, 2002. The replication of these motifs across geographically dispersed kurgans implies a shared visual vocabulary, reinforcing collective identity among diverse Scythian clans and providing a recognizable indicator of elite status within and across tribal networks. Artistic expression in the Scythian context also served religious and spiritual functions. Many scholars interpret animal-style imagery as symbolic mediators between the natural and supernatural worlds, reflecting beliefs recorded by Herodotus regarding the sacredness of animals and their connection to steppe deities. Herodotus, Histories, 4.71. The depiction of predators in dynamic motion may have been intended to convey spiritual power, vitality, or protective qualities. These artifacts, often placed in funerary contexts, suggest that visual culture functioned as both an extension of cosmological thought and a mechanism for ritual practice. Material culture thus reinforced spiritual ideology while simultaneously legitimizing the social hierarchy by associating elites with divine or natural potency. Trade and technological interactions further contributed to the evolution of Scythian artistic expression. Evidence from excavated kurgans shows stylistic influences from Near Eastern and Greek metalwork integrated into animal-style compositions. For example, gold plaques from Crimea exhibit both local steppe motifs and Hellenistic ornamental patterns, reflecting selective adaptation rather than wholesale adoption. Anthony, 2007. This combination of indigenous and external elements indicates that Scythian elites actively curated symbolic objects to enhance prestige and assert authority. The ability to access imported materials and integrate foreign artistic techniques illustrates the interconnectedness of economic, cultural, and political networks in steppe society. Interpretive analysis highlights 3 systemic insights regarding Scythian art. First, the consistent use of animal-style motifs across multiple media and regions demonstrates the role of visual culture in unifying dispersed communities under a common symbolic framework. Second, the correlation between artifact elaboration and elite burials indicates that artistic expression was an instrument of social differentiation and political legitimacy. Third, integration of external influences into local artistic conventions reveals a selective engagement with broader Eurasian trade and cultural networks, reinforcing both status and identity. Together, these dynamics illustrate how material culture served as a medium for communication, ritual authority, and the projection of power. Animal-style artistry also provides insight into the technological sophistication and craftsmanship of the Scythians. Metallurgical analysis of gold and bronze artifacts demonstrates advanced techniques, including repoussé, engraving, and casting, indicating specialized workshops and skilled artisans. The technical proficiency required to produce complex designs reflects organized labor and knowledge transmission, further suggesting that elite patronage structured both production and distribution of symbolic objects. In this sense, the integration of artistry, technology, and status reinforces the interdependence of economic, political, and spiritual systems in Scythian society. By the 4th century BCE, animal-style motifs had become both culturally codified and geographically pervasive, forming a shared visual language that extended across the Pontic steppe. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that this art was not merely decorative but functional, signaling social rank, reinforcing religious beliefs, and asserting political legitimacy. While beliefs unified clans, economic systems allowed them to sustain and expand, providing the material foundation for continued social cohesion and facilitating broader interactions with neighboring societies. The wealth of the steppe was measured not in gold alone, but in herds and mobility. Pastoralism formed the economic backbone of early Scythian society, providing both sustenance and the resources necessary to sustain social and military structures. Archaeological evidence from settlement sites and kurgans in the northern Pontic region demonstrates that cattle, sheep, goats, and particularly horses were central to daily life and ritual practice. Koryakova Epimakov, 2007. The prominence of horses is especially significant. Osteological analyses reveal early domestication and evidence of bit wear, indicating their use in riding, transport, and warfare. Outram et al., 2009. Herd management dictated seasonal migration patterns, shaping the spatial organization of clans and ensuring efficient exploitation of steppe pastures across vast distances. Economic specialization extended beyond subsistence. Scythian communities developed production and trade networks that integrated pastoral surplus with imported goods. Greek colonies along the northern Black Sea, including Olbia and Chersonesus, supplied pottery, metal implements, and luxury items that entered steppe circulation through barter or tribute arrangements. Excavations at kurgan sites have uncovered significant quantities of Greek ceramic fragments and metal vessels, often incorporated into burial offerings, highlighting their dual economic and symbolic value. Anthony, 2007. Such exchanges reinforced the social status of elite individuals while also creating enduring economic links between nomadic and sedentary populations. Pastoralism and trade were mutually reinforcing, supporting both material wealth and political authority. Control over herds, grazing lands, and trade routes enabled chieftains to consolidate power within and between clans. Herodotus describes the Scythians as formidable horsemen, whose mobility and resource management allowed them to conduct raids, defend territory, and negotiate with neighboring states. Herodotus, Histories, 4.20 to 4.25. Archaeological patterns of kurgan distribution correspond with river valleys and natural corridors, reflecting strategic selection of pastoral and trade sites. This systematic management demonstrates how economic resources were not only a basis of subsistence but also a critical component of social and military organization. Interpretive analysis highlights three systemic insights regarding Scythian economic structures. First, reliance on pastoralism illustrates how environmental adaptation dictated both mobility and settlement patterns, shaping political and social hierarchies. Second, the integration of Greek imports into local economies reflects an early form of cross-cultural economic engagement, which facilitated both material wealth and symbolic prestige. Third, the control of herds and grazing territories provided a structural foundation for military capacity, enabling chieftains to mobilize forces rapidly across the steppe. These factors collectively demonstrate that economic organization was inseparable from broader societal function, including governance, military strategy, and ritual practice. The economic base also influenced technological development. Metallurgical analysis indicates that bronze and iron tools, weaponry, and harness fittings were produced locally and supplemented by imported materials. This combination of indigenous production and foreign exchange ensured the sustainability of livestock management, mobility infrastructure, and military readiness. Artifacts such as bridles, stirrups, and wheeled carts demonstrate that technological innovation was closely linked to economic priorities, enabling steppe populations to maintain pastoral productivity while supporting elite status and ceremonial display. By the 6th century BCE, these pastoral and trade networks had become firmly established, providing a durable foundation for social, political, and military structures. The systematic integration of livestock management, seasonal migration, and external trade allowed the Scythians to accumulate wealth, coordinate collective action, and assert influence over surrounding regions. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that this economic strength directly underpinned the emergence of a powerful, mobile military class capable of projecting authority across the Pontic steppe. A strong economic foundation supported the Scythians' military expansion across the steppe, facilitating their rise as a dominant nomadic power in Eurasia. The steppe's greatest army was not built in fortresses, but mounted on swift horses. By the 6th century BCE, Scythian society had transformed mobility into a sophisticated military advantage. Archaeological evidence and Herodotus accounts reveal that Scythian warfare centered on highly skilled cavalry, utilizing composite bows, light armor, and rapid maneuvering to dominate the expansive Pontic steppe. Herodotus, Histories, 4.71 to 4.80. Excavated kurgans consistently include weapons such as bronze or iron spearheads, arrowheads, and quivers, reflecting both the technological proficiency and martial focus of the society. Jacobson, 1995. These findings underscore that military capability was embedded within social structure, with elite chieftains leading mounted contingents drawn from clan-based units. Cavalry tactics relied on mobility, archery, and psychological warfare. Steppe terrain favored mounted skirmishers capable of encircling, feinting, or executing sudden raids on larger, less mobile forces. Herodotus notes the Scythians' use of the Parthian shot, discharging arrows while retreating, a maneuver that maximized both range and speed. Comparative studies of nomadic armies across Eurasia indicate that these tactics required extensive training, coordination, and horsemanship, illustrating how environmental conditions shaped the organization and operation of military forces. D. Cosmo, 2002. The combination of light armor, composite bows, and horse mobility allowed the Scythians to engage in both raiding and defensive campaigns effectively, maintaining control over vast steppe territories without reliance on permanent fortifications. Weaponry and equipment reflect both technological skill and social hierarchy. Composite bows, bronze or iron swords, and intricately decorated arrowheads were often placed in elite burials, indicating that martial capacity and social status were closely linked. Kurgan excavations in southern Russia and Ukraine show that highly decorated weapons, sometimes adorned with animal-style motifs, were associated with chieftains or elite warriors. Kozlov, 1977. This connection demonstrates that military prowess was not only functional but symbolic, reinforcing authority and legitimacy within and between clans. From a systemic perspective, weapon design, burial practice, and hierarchical leadership were interdependent components of Scythian military organization. Mobility also facilitated strategic influence over trade and territorial expansion. By controlling the movement of herds, migration corridors, and river valleys, Scythian cavalry could enforce regional dominance, protect trade routes, and negotiate with neighboring states. Greek colonies on the northern Black Sea frequently interacted with Scythian forces, providing tribute or military cooperation to secure safe passage along trade networks. Archaeological evidence, including imported Greek metalwork and pottery found in burial contexts, supports accounts of economic and military interdependence. Anthony, 2007. These interactions underscore the integration of military strength with political and economic influence, revealing the steppe's interlinked systems of power. Interpretive analysis identifies three key insights regarding Scythian military organization. First, reliance on mounted warfare illustrates the direct connection between environment and military strategy, showing how steppe geography shaped operational capabilities. Second, elite weaponry and burial practices reveal that martial skill was institutionalized as a marker of social status and political authority. Third, the integration of military, economic, and diplomatic functions demonstrates that warfare was both a practical tool and a system of influence, underpinning Scythian dominance across the Pontic steppe. Together, these factors highlight how mobility, technology, and social hierarchy combine to form an effective and adaptable military system. By the late 6th century BCE, Scythian cavalry had established a durable model for steppe warfare, integrating horsemanship, archery, and elite leadership into a coherent system of regional control. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that this capability enabled Scythians to protect trade networks, project power across dispersed territories, and negotiate strategically with neighboring sedentary communities. Effective warfare enabled the Scythians to secure trade routes and expand influence, setting the stage for coordinated campaigns, territorial consolidation, and the emergence of broader steppe hegemony in subsequent centuries. The Scythians were as feared by empires as they were courted as allies. From the 7th through the 4th centuries BCE, they engaged in a complex web of conflicts, alliances, and negotiations with neighboring powers, including the Cimmerians, Persians, Greeks, and Thracians. Herodotus provides detailed accounts of these interactions, describing Scythian campaigns against the Cimmerians and their strategic responses to Persian invasions. Herodotus, Histories, 4.12 to 4.21. Archaeological evidence, including weapons caches, fortified sites, and imported goods, corroborates these accounts, revealing the tangible impact of diplomacy, trade, and military engagement on Scythian society. Early conflicts with the Cimmerians in the 7th century BCE illustrate the Scythians' capacity to consolidate steppe territories through military action. Excavations along the northern Black Sea reveal kurgans with weapons, and skeletal remains consistent with battle trauma, supporting textual reports of clashes. Kozlov, 1977. These victories allowed the Scythians to extend control over river valleys and pastures, providing secure grazing lands for herds and strategic positions for trade. Military success against other nomadic groups reinforced chieftain authority, demonstrating the interplay between combat, social hierarchy, and territorial consolidation. Interactions with the Persian Empire, particularly during the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, highlight the Scythians' diplomatic as well as martial adaptability. Herodotus recounts Persian king Darius' expedition into Scythian lands, which was met not with conventional pitched battle but with harassment, retreat, and scorched earth tactics that exploited steppe mobility. Herodotus, Histories, 4.88 to 4.92. Archaeological studies of settlement patterns and nomadic encampments suggest that these strategies allowed the Scythians to protect herds, maintain cohesion, and control access points to trade routes. Such evidence demonstrates that military tactics were integrated with strategic economic and territorial considerations, emphasizing the link between mobility and statecraft. Relations with Greek colonies along the northern Black Sea illustrate the diplomatic dimension of Scythian power. Greek sources and material evidence indicate that Scythians engaged in trade, tribute, and occasional military cooperation, often providing protection in exchange for goods such as pottery, metalwork, and luxury items. Anthony, 2007. Kurgan burials containing imported Greek objects highlight the dual economic and symbolic function of these interactions, suggesting that diplomacy was closely tied to status, ritual practice, and the reinforcement of elite authority. These exchanges also facilitated cultural transmission, including artistic motifs and metallurgical techniques, further integrating Scythians into regional networks. Engagement with Thracian and Balkan populations demonstrates the extension of Scythian influence into southeastern Europe. Archaeological findings, including weapon styles and decorative motifs in Thracian burials, indicate the presence of Scythian mercenaries or allied groups, suggesting strategic alliances that extended beyond the steppe. Koryakova-Epimikov, 2007. Herodotus references such alliances, noting that Scythian forces could be both cooperative and adversarial, depending on political and economic circumstances. These interactions underscore the Scythians' ability to balance diplomacy and military action, leveraging mobility and regional knowledge to maintain influence across diverse terrains. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this period of regional interaction. First, military success against nomadic and sedentary neighbors facilitated territorial consolidation and reinforced elite authority. Second, diplomatic and economic engagement with Greek colonies illustrates how material exchange reinforced both political legitimacy and cultural identity. Third, strategic alliances with Thracian and Balkan groups demonstrate the integration of military, economic, and diplomatic capacities into a coherent system of regional power. Together, these dynamics highlight the Scythians' ability to adapt governance, warfare, and economic strategy to shifting geopolitical circumstances. By the 4th century BCE, Scythian influence across the northern Black Sea and steppe regions was firmly established. Archaeological and textual evidence indicates that these interactions, through both conflict and alliance, allowed the Scythians to secure trade routes, assert military dominance, and integrate diverse cultural and economic practices into their society. Control over trade routes and alliances fueled cultural and economic growth, providing the structural foundation for continued social cohesion, artistic production, and the expansion of political authority across the Pontic steppe. Even a nomadic people left traces in stone and clay. While the Scythians are often characterized as highly mobile pastoralists, archaeological evidence reveals that they also constructed temporary settlements, fortified refuges, and engaged with urban centers along the northern Black Sea. Seasonal encampments, often positioned near rivers or fertile pastures, demonstrate careful planning to optimize grazing and water access for herds. Excavations at sites near the Dnieper and Don rivers reveal semi-permanent dwellings, storage pits, and hearths, reflecting coordinated habitation patterns that balanced mobility with practical settlement infrastructure. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. These sites suggest that Scythians adapted their movements to environmental and economic conditions while maintaining social cohesion. Fortified refuges were employed selectively in response to both intertribal conflict and incursions from neighboring powers. Archaeologists have identified earthen ramparts and palisade enclosures in steppe regions, providing temporary defensive positions during periods of heightened threat. These fortifications were not permanent urban centers but served as protective nodes within a network of mobile settlements, allowing clans to safeguard herds, leadership, and accumulated wealth. Evidence from fortifications in the Don region indicates that they could accommodate multiple family units and were strategically located to control key river crossings, illustrating the intersection of geography, defense, and social organization. Mallory, 1998. Interactions with urban centers further illustrate the adaptive strategies of Scythian communities. Greek colonies such as Olbia and Panticapaeum provide material evidence of trade, diplomacy, and occasional military engagement. Excavations reveal Scythian imports, including livestock, furs, and crafted goods, alongside Greek ceramics, metalwork, and coins. These exchanges demonstrate that Scythians were active participants in regional economic networks, negotiating both for material wealth and symbolic authority. The presence of Scythian mercenaries or visiting elites at urban sites, as recorded in Greek sources, underscores the dual role of mobility and settlement in facilitating influence beyond the steppe. Anthony, 2007. Interpretive analysis highlights 3 systemic insights. First, seasonal settlements and fortifications reveal a flexible approach to habitation and defense, showing that mobility was complemented by selective investment in protective infrastructure. Second, engagement with urban centers illustrates the Scythians' capacity to integrate pastoral, economic, and political strategies within broader regional systems. Third, the combination of mobile settlements, fortified refuges, and urban interaction demonstrates a complex adaptation strategy, balancing the logistical requirements of herding, the demands of warfare, and the opportunities of trade and diplomacy. These patterns suggest that Scythian mobility was not an obstacle to influence but a strategic asset leveraged across multiple domains. Technological and material evidence further reinforces these conclusions. Hearths, storage pits, and post-hole arrangements indicate construction knowledge suitable for temporary or semi-permanent habitation. Artifacts from fortified sites, including weaponry, pottery, and imported goods, show that these nodes functioned as economic and defensive hubs. The strategic placement of settlements along rivers and trade corridors facilitated both mobility and coordination, allowing clans to respond to seasonal, military, or economic exigencies. In this way, Scythian society exemplifies how nomadic groups could maintain flexibility while exploiting the advantages of environmental knowledge, engineering, and material culture. By the late 5th century BCE, these adaptive strategies enabled the Scythians to consolidate control over key steppe regions and exert influence on neighboring urban and tribal populations. Archaeological and textual evidence demonstrates that mobility, seasonal settlement, and selective fortification allowed the Scythians to integrate military, economic, and social functions into a cohesive system of regional dominance. Expansion and contact led to the Scythians' peak influence, setting the stage for their cultural, economic, and political zenith across the Pontic steppe. The Scythians had become the undisputed masters of the steppe. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, their authority extended across the northern Black Sea region, encompassing vast swathes of river valleys, pastures, and trading corridors. Archaeological surveys revealed dense clusters of kurgans throughout Ukraine, southern Russia, and Crimea, many containing elaborate grave goods that attest to unprecedented wealth accumulation. Jacobson, 1995. Koryakova-Epimikov, 2007. These burial sites indicate not only the consolidation of elite authority, but also the material prosperity generated through control of trade, tribute, and pastoral resources. The spatial distribution of these kurgans suggests a coordinated network of political and economic centers strategically located to monitor movement along key rivers and steppe routes. Military and economic dominance reinforced one another. The Scythians' highly mobile cavalry allowed them to conduct raids, enforce tribute, and defend territories with remarkable efficiency. Herodotus documents campaigns against neighboring tribes and cities, describing the Scythians' ability to project power over vast distances without permanent fortifications. Herodotus, Histories, 4.71 to 4.92. Archaeological evidence corroborates these accounts. Weapons, horse gear, and traces of temporary encampments are concentrated along strategic routes connecting the Don, Dnieper, and Lower Volga regions. This integration of mobility, military capacity, and economic oversight demonstrates the systemic relationship between pastoral wealth, raiding, and regional authority. Control of trade routes was particularly significant. Greek colonies such as Olbia, Panticapaeum, and Chersonesus depended on Scythian intermediaries for access to steppe products, including furs, grain, livestock, and crafted goods. Excavated burials contain imported Greek pottery and metalwork, reflecting both commercial exchange and the symbolic reinforcement of elite status. Anthony, 2007. By regulating trade and securing passages across the steppe, Scythian leaders could maintain economic dominance, redistribute wealth within and between clans, and consolidate social cohesion. This combination of economic, military, and political control allowed the Scythians to operate as a cohesive power network across a region spanning hundreds of kilometers. Interpretive analysis highlights three systemic insights from this period. First, territorial consolidation demonstrates how mobility and strategic placement of elite centers enabled effective governance across a dispersed population. Second, the integration of military capability and economic control illustrates the interdependence of warfare, wealth, and political legitimacy. Third, material evidence from kurgans and trade artifacts shows that social and economic structures were closely intertwined, providing a durable basis for elite authority. Together, these insights reveal a complex system of governance, in which mobility, pastoral wealth, and trade networks reinforced the Scythians' peak influence. The scale of Scythian authority is also evident in their ceremonial and cultural practices. Monumental kurgans, often accompanied by sacrificial offerings including horses and attendants, reflect the symbolic codification of elite power and divine sanction. Jacobson, 1995. Artifacts such as gold plaques and weapons adorned with animal-style motifs further signal the integration of material culture, status, and religious ideology. These objects reinforced hierarchical structures while simultaneously projecting power across the steppe, linking political authority with cosmology and artistic expression. By the late 5th century BCE, Scythian dominance over the Pontic steppe was both political and economic, encompassing control over strategic territories, trade routes, and cultural influence. Archaeological surveys show continuity in elite burials, settlement patterns, and trade artifacts, indicating that this period of peak power was sustained and institutionalized across multiple generations. Herodotus accounts and material evidence converge to demonstrate that Scythian authority was not transient but deeply rooted in systemic mechanisms of mobility, military organization, and economic management. Their dominance brought increasing interaction with the Greek world. The Scythians' control of trade and mobility corridors made them essential partners, adversaries, or intermediaries for Greek colonies seeking access to steppe resources. These interactions facilitated both the flow of material goods and the exchange of ideas, artistic motifs, and technological knowledge, further integrating Scythian society into broader regional networks. As they consolidated power, the Scythians combined military capacity, economic oversight, and cultural influence to maintain their hegemony across the northern Black Sea and steppe regions. Greek wine and Scythian horses flowed across the steppe in equal measure. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the northern Black Sea region had become a nexus of interaction between Scythian nomads and Greek colonial settlements, including Olbia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum. Archaeological evidence demonstrates extensive trade networks, with Kurgan burials containing imported Greek pottery, metal vessels, and luxury goods. These items were not merely decorative but served as markers of elite status and instruments of social cohesion, reflecting the integration of economic exchange into the political and ritual systems of Scythian society. Anthony, 2007. The trade itself was highly organized, relying on Scythian mobility to transport pastoral products such as horses, cattle, and furs across steppe corridors. Greek colonies provided goods in exchange, including wine, olive oil, and metal artifacts, creating a reciprocal economic relationship. Herodotus notes that Scythian intermediaries regulated access to these resources, leveraging control over trade routes to consolidate political authority. Herodotus, Histories, 4.71 to 4.92. Archaeological surveys support these accounts, showing concentration of Greek imports in kurgans associated with chieftains and elite warriors, indicating that participation in trade was a key component of status and governance. Diplomatic relations complemented economic exchange. Scythians and Greek colonies engaged in formal alliances, mutual defense agreements, and tribute arrangements, particularly when conflicts arose with other nomadic groups or local populations. Greek inscriptions and settlement records indicate periods of Scythian presence at urban centers, sometimes as mercenaries or negotiators, highlighting their dual role as both potential threats and valued partners. These interactions underscore the strategic importance of mobility. The Scythians' ability to traverse the steppe rapidly allowed them to exert influence while maintaining autonomy, balancing coercion with cooperation. Material culture demonstrates the depth of these connections. Imported Greek ceramics, jewelry, and metal tools appear in kurgans alongside traditional Scythian artifacts, including weapons, horse harnesses, and gold adornments. This synthesis reflects selective adoption of foreign goods for practical, symbolic, and ritual purposes. For instance, Greek vessels found in funerary contexts may have been used in feasting or ceremonial practices, reinforcing elite authority while signaling cultural sophistication. Such integration illustrates the Scythians' capacity to leverage external resources to reinforce internal social hierarchies and broader regional influence. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this period of interaction. First, trade and diplomacy were deeply interwoven with social stratification, allowing elites to consolidate wealth and authority through control of external networks. Second, cultural exchange facilitated technological and artistic innovation, as Scythians adapted Greek forms and motifs to local production and ritual practices. Third, strategic engagement with Greek colonies demonstrates the Scythians' ability to navigate complex regional politics, using economic leverage, military threat, and mobility to maintain autonomy while projecting influence. Together, these factors illustrate a sophisticated, integrated system of economic, cultural, and political power. Military alliances with Greek settlements also reinforced Scythian authority. In periods of external threat, such as Persian campaigns or regional tribal conflicts, Greek colonies relied on Scythian cavalry for protection, while Scythian elites benefited from access to urban markets and imported goods. Archaeological evidence from fortified Greek sites, combined with Herodotus' descriptions, confirms that these arrangements were mutually advantageous, formalized through tribute, gifts, or negotiated obligations. This duality, both economic and military, enabled Scythian leaders to consolidate regional dominance while sustaining the material and symbolic resources necessary for continued authority. By the late 5th century BCE, the interaction between Scythians and Greek colonies had become institutionalized. Kurgan evidence, settlement patterns, and Greek textual sources indicate that trade, diplomacy, and military collaboration were essential components of steppe governance. Economic and cultural exchange reinforced both wealth and influence, creating a durable framework that allowed Scythian elites to maintain political cohesion, support military campaigns, and project power across the Pontic steppe. This integration of mobility, trade, and diplomacy exemplifies the systemic sophistication that characterized Scythian peak power. Art and ritual immortalized a people at the height of their power. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Scythians had developed a complex social hierarchy reinforced through monumental burial practices, elite artistry, and conspicuous displays of wealth. Archaeological evidence from Pasuric kurgans, particularly those in the Altai region, demonstrates the sophistication of Scythian craftsmanship. Exquisite gold plaques, elaborately decorated weapons, and finely woven textiles attest to both technical mastery and symbolic expression, reflecting an integrated system in which artistic production reinforced social authority. Jacobson, 1995. Kuzmina, 2007. Elite kurgans served as both funerary monuments and instruments of social codification. The richest burials, often containing multiple horses, attendants, and extensive grave goods, mark the apex of steppe hierarchy. The placement and scale of these kurgans reveal deliberate patterns of authority. The largest, most elaborately equipped burials belong to chieftains or military leaders, while smaller interments reflect subordinate status within the clan network. These practices institutionalized social stratification, visually and ritually reinforcing elite privilege across generations. Gold artifacts, including pectorals, belts, and weapon adornments, functioned as both markers of rank and expressions of religious or cosmological symbolism, integrating art, ritual, and political legitimacy. Animal-style motifs reached their artistic zenith during this period. Excavated artifacts demonstrate highly stylized depictions of predators, mythical creatures, and hunting scenes, executed in gold, bronze, and textile embroidery. The Pasuric mummies, preserved in permafrost, provide direct evidence of these techniques, including tattooed imagery and intricately patterned clothing. These motifs were not decorative alone. They encoded cosmological beliefs, martial prowess, and social identity. The synthesis of ritual, artistry, and social hierarchy reflects a coherent cultural system in which aesthetic expression reinforced both spiritual ideology and political power. Economic and military structures supported this cultural flourishing. Wealth accumulation from pastoralism, trade with Greek colonies, and raiding provided the resources necessary to commission complex artworks and monumental burials. Kurgans frequently contained imported Greek pottery and metal objects, integrated with indigenous steppe craftsmanship. This combination of local and foreign materials underscores the Scythians' ability to appropriate external resources for internal social and cultural reinforcement. demonstrating the systemic link between economy, military success, and elite artistic patronage. Anthony, 2007. Interpretive analysis highlights three key insights regarding peak social and cultural structures. First, monumental kurgans and material wealth demonstrate the codification of hierarchy, reinforcing the authority of chieftains and elite warriors across geographically dispersed populations. Second, the integration of art, ritual, and political symbolism indicates that cultural production was a deliberate tool for maintaining social cohesion and ideological legitimacy. Third, the combination of local craftsmanship and imported goods reflects the Scythians' engagement with regional trade networks, showing that cultural flourishing was enabled by economic and diplomatic integration. Together, these factors reveal a society in which art, ritual, and hierarchy were mutually reinforcing components of systemic governance. Preservation of cultural materials, particularly from Pazyryk, offers additional insights into daily life, belief, and social organization. Textiles, felt mats, and decorated horse trappings demonstrate specialized labor and knowledge transmission, suggesting workshops or artisan networks maintained under elite patronage. Tattooed imagery on mummies reveals personal expressions of identity, status, and possibly religious affiliation, indicating that visual culture extended beyond funerary contexts into social and personal spheres. These patterns reflect a society in which elite control over material production reinforced political authority and social differentiation. By the late 4th century BCE, this integration of wealth, artistry, and social stratification had created a durable peak in Scythian civilization. Monumental kurgans, luxury artifacts, and elaborate ritual practices demonstrate that the Scythians had successfully codified social hierarchy while projecting authority across the steppe. Yet, evidence also indicates the emergence of pressures that would challenge this system. Increasing competition from neighboring nomadic groups, shifting trade dynamics with Greek colonies, and potential internal factionalism. The cultural and political structures that had enabled peak influence also created dependencies and vulnerabilities, setting the stage for gradual decline. External pressures and internal fragmentation would eventually undermine the cohesion that had sustained Scythian dominance. Nonetheless, the archaeological record preserves the apex of Scythian artistry, ritual, and social organization. Through monumental burials, imported and local wealth, and the codification of animal-style artistry, the Scythians articulated a society in which mobility, economic prowess, and elite authority converged. These developments illustrate the systemic complexity of peak Scythian power and provide a foundation for understanding both their historical impact and the conditions that foreshadowed their eventual decline. Nomads met empire on equal terms across the steppe. During the late 6th and early 5th centuries BCE, the Scythians confronted the expansionist ambitions of the Achaemenid Persian Empire under Darius I. Herodotus provides detailed accounts of Darius' campaigns into Scythian territories, describing a series of encounters in which Persian forces, despite numerical superiority and organized formations, struggled against highly mobile steppe tactics. Herodotus, Histories, 4.88 to 4.92. Archaeological evidence supports these accounts, with finds of arrowheads, weapon caches, and temporary encampments along the Don and Dnieper river corridors indicating widespread and strategic Scythian resistance. These interactions exemplify how nomadic societies could confront imperial powers effectively through mobility, adaptability, and environmental mastery. Scythian military strategy during these campaigns was highly reliant on cavalry and archery. The composite bow, light armor, and agile horsemanship allowed the Scythians to conduct harassment, feigned retreats, and scorched earth tactics that neutralized Persian advantages in infantry and siege equipment. Herodotus notes that the Scythians deliberately avoided prolonged engagement, instead drawing the Persians deeper into steppe terrain, where supply lines were stretched and strategic disadvantage was heightened. Archaeological studies of battlefield debris, including concentrated clusters of arrowheads and horse remains, confirm the application of these tactics, illustrating the integration of mobility, terrain exploitation, and strategic foresight. D. Cosmo, 2002. The conflict was not solely martial but also strategic in its political and economic dimensions. Scythian control over river valleys and grazing lands allowed them to disrupt Persian supply routes and maintain autonomy over trade networks with Greek colonies along the Black Sea. The steppe's geography, combined with seasonal mobility, enabled Scythians to regulate access to these corridors, imposing indirect influence without permanent fortifications. Excavated kurgans containing weapons and imported Greek goods suggest that military preparedness and economic control were closely intertwined, with chieftains maintaining authority by combining martial capacity with regulation of commerce. Anthony, 2007. 3 interpretive insights emerge from Scythian-Persian interactions. First, these campaigns demonstrate the strategic advantage of mobility in steppe warfare, allowing smaller, dispersed forces to counter larger imperial armies. Second, the integration of pastoral resources, territorial knowledge, and cavalry tactics illustrates the systemic organization of Scythian society, where economy, military capacity, and political authority were interdependent. Third, the combination of military resistance and control over trade networks underscores the Scythians' ability to leverage environmental and social factors to sustain autonomy and influence. These insights highlight how nomadic societies could operate as both independent actors and regional power brokers in the shadow of imperial expansion. Diplomatic consequences followed military encounters. Even after conflicts, the Persians and Scythians engaged in negotiation and symbolic recognition of territorial limits. Herodotus notes instances of tribute exchange, trade agreements, and ceremonial interactions that indicate a mutual acknowledgement of power, despite the asymmetry in state structure and organization. Archaeological evidence of Persian imports in Scythian settlements, including metal vessels and luxury goods, suggests that such interactions were both pragmatic and symbolic, blending coercion, commerce, and diplomacy into a multifaceted system of interregional relations. By the early 5th century BCE, Scythian campaigns against Persia had secured the steppe's autonomy, allowing the Scythians to maintain influence over strategic corridors and neighboring populations. Archaeological patterns, including fortified encampments and concentration of high-status weaponry in kurgans, indicate that military encounters reinforced internal hierarchy and centralized authority among elite chieftains. Military preparedness, coupled with mobility and environmental knowledge, enabled the Scythians to negotiate with empires on relatively equal footing, controlling the terms of engagement across the northern Black Sea region. Military encounters influenced diplomatic and trade strategies. The experience of confronting the Persian Empire reinforced the importance of flexible alliances, territorial surveillance, and regulation of exchange networks. By integrating combat readiness with economic and diplomatic oversight, the Scythians maintained a coherent system of regional power that combined military deterrence, strategic mobility, and economic leverage. This approach allowed them to operate as a durable force across the steppe, shaping interactions with neighboring empires, nomadic groups, and urban centers while sustaining their own political, economic, and cultural systems. From the steppes to Europe, Scythian influence was unmistakable. During the 6th to 4th centuries BCE, Scythian groups extended their activities beyond the northern Black Sea, engaging with Thracian populations, the lower Danube region, and parts of Eastern Europe. Archaeological evidence indicates both raiding and trade as mechanisms of expansion. Settlements along the lower Danube and fortified sites in Thrace reveal Scythian presence through weapon caches, horse harnesses, and imported Greek goods, demonstrating a blend of martial projection and economic integration. Koryakova Pimikov, 2007. Military incursions were central to the projection of Scythian influence in these regions. Steppe cavalry conducted raids into Thracian and Balkan territories, often seizing livestock, tribute, and goods. Greek and Thracian sources describe the Scythians as formidable raiders capable of rapid, coordinated strikes, exploiting mobility and knowledge of terrain to maintain dominance over local populations. Herodotus, Histories, 4.71 to 4.92. Excavations of fortified settlements along strategic river crossings indicate that both locals and Scythian groups employed temporary defensive structures, emphasizing the interplay of offense and defense in territorial control. Trade networks complemented military activity, facilitating the flow of resources between the steppe and European regions. Greek colonies and Thracian communities exchanged pottery, metal tools, and luxury goods for Scythian livestock, furs, and crafted items. Evidence from burials and settlement layers in Eastern Europe shows the circulation of these goods, demonstrating that economic engagement often accompanied raiding activity. Integration of trade and martial activity enabled Scythian elites to consolidate wealth, reinforce social hierarchies, and sustain military capability, illustrating the interdependence of economy and strategy. Three interpretive insights emerge from Scythian interactions with Thrace and Eastern Europe. First, raiding and trade were complementary strategies, allowing mobility and military prowess to secure material and political advantage. Second, the spread of Scythian material culture, including weapons and animal-style artifacts, indicates cultural influence as well as physical presence. Third, the combination of temporary fortifications, settlements, and trade engagement reveals a systematic approach to regional integration, balancing coercion, negotiation, and economic leverage. These patterns highlight the adaptive strategies that allowed Scythians to extend influence far beyond the Pontic steppe. Cultural transmission accompanied expansion into European regions. The dissemination of Scythian artistic motifs, particularly in gold plaques, weapon ornamentation, and textiles, suggests both symbolic and practical adoption of steppe culture by neighboring populations. Pazyryk-style motifs appear in Thracian burials and northern Balkan artifacts, reflecting the integration of steppe aesthetics into local material culture. Such exchanges were not merely decorative. They reinforced the perception of Scythian authority, connected social hierarchies across regions, and facilitated political recognition among diverse communities. By the late 5th century BCE, the limits of expansion became apparent. Geographic constraints, competition from other nomadic groups, and emerging centralized states in Europe challenged Scythian influence. Nevertheless, archaeological evidence indicates sustained presence and activity in these regions, with temporary encampments, trade goods, and weaponry demonstrating continued integration of military, economic, and cultural strategies. The system of expansion through mobility, raiding, and commerce remained central to Scythian dominance, even as structural and external pressures began to create vulnerabilities. Cultural and military expansion began encountering limitations. While raiding and trade extended Scythian authority, the logistical and social constraints of managing distant territories introduced challenges to cohesion and control. Settlement evidence, trade patterns, and burial distributions suggest that elite oversight was increasingly stretched, highlighting the systemic vulnerabilities that would contribute to eventual decline. These developments mark a transition in which external pressures and internal dynamics began to constrain the mobility, military efficacy, and economic integration that had previously underpinned steppe dominance. History is often written by outsiders observing the steppe. Greek historians, most notably Herodotus and later Pseudo-Skylax, provided detailed accounts of the Scythians, describing their customs, military strategies, and social organization. Herodotus' Histories, 4.71 to 4.92, portrays the Scythians as highly mobile, warlike, and politically fragmented, emphasizing their nomadic lifestyle, cavalry tactics, and ritual practices. Pseudo-Skylax, writing slightly later, focuses on trade, settlement patterns, and interactions with Greek colonies. While these sources offer valuable historical insight, they reflect the perspectives and biases of sedentary observers attempting to interpret unfamiliar steppe societies. Greek historiography often emphasized the otherness of the Scythians, framing them in contrast to Greek urban civilization. Herodotus, for instance, highlights customs such as ritual burial with horses and human attendants, interpreting these practices as exotic or even barbaric. Yet archaeological evidence provides a different dimension, revealing systematic social structures, elaborate artistic traditions, and sophisticated economic networks. Kurgan excavations, such as those at Pazyryk and the northern Black Sea, demonstrate that rituals described by Greek authors were part of codified social and political systems, integrating religion, status, and mobility. This comparison highlights the importance of evaluating textual sources alongside material evidence to construct a balanced historical narrative. Interpretive analysis reveals three key insights regarding Greek depictions. First, outsider perspectives often amplified the perceived novelty or extremity of Scythian customs, shaping subsequent historical interpretation. Second, Greek accounts frequently conflated political decentralization with social disorder, whereas archaeological evidence indicates coordinated leadership and elite networks. Third, trade and diplomatic relationships are sometimes underrepresented in textual sources, though material culture, such as Greek imports and Korgons, confirms extensive engagement with Hellenic societies. Together, these points underscore the need to critically assess historiographical sources, recognizing both the value and the limitations of external observations. Archaeological evidence provides a corrective to textual bias. Imported Greek pottery, coins, and metalwork found in Scythian Korgons demonstrate sustained trade and interaction, while burial practices indicate social stratification rather than randomness. Animal-style artifacts, weapons, and horse trappings reflect coordinated production, elite patronage, and ritualized expressions of authority. These findings show that many exotic elements described by Greek writers were part of deliberate systems reinforcing political legitimacy, social cohesion, and cultural identity. Comparing material culture with historiography allows historians to reconcile perception with the structural realities of Scythian society. Greek perceptions also influenced diplomatic and military interactions. Cities such as Olbia and Chersonesus negotiated with Scythian elites based on both respect and fear, informed by narratives circulating through Hellenic networks. Herodotus' emphasis on Scythian mobility and raiding potential shaped Greek strategies in trade and military planning, demonstrating how historiography itself could affect regional dynamics. Archaeological evidence of fortified settlements, trade goods, and military paraphernalia corroborates the strategic concerns noted in Greek accounts, indicating that perception and reality were intertwined in the practical engagement with Scythians. By the 4th century BCE, Greek historiography had established enduring narratives about the steppe. While these accounts provide invaluable records of interactions, they must be read critically, acknowledging their rhetorical framing and cultural biases. The interplay between perception and material evidence allows a nuanced understanding of Scythian society, revealing a civilization that combined mobility, military prowess, social hierarchy, and economic integration. As trade, diplomacy, and military expansion continued, the Scythians were increasingly subject to both internal pressures and external scrutiny, highlighting the dual role of observation and misperception in shaping historical memory. Perception and reality intertwined as the Scythians faced new threats. Greek historiography emphasized their martial and ritual characteristics, framing the steppe as a space of both opportunity and danger. Archaeology, however, reveals structured governance, integrated economic systems, and cultural sophistication. Together, these sources provide a comprehensive view of the Scythians during a period of broad influence, demonstrating that understanding the steppe requires balancing textual narratives with material evidence, a principle that will guide the analysis of their eventual decline. Trade routes made the steppe a crossroads of wealth and influence. During the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, the Scythians actively engaged with Greek colonies along the northern Black Sea, including Olbia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum. Archaeological excavations reveal significant quantities of Greek pottery, metalware, coins, and luxury items in Scythian Korgons, reflecting both economic exchange and elite consumption. These artifacts illustrate the scale and sophistication of trade, demonstrating that Scythian mobility, pastoral production, and strategic territorial control enabled systematic economic integration with Hellenic markets. Anthony, 2007, Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Pastoral products formed the backbone of Scythian trade. Horses, cattle, and furs were exchanged for Greek goods, such as wine, olive oil, and metal implements. Numismatic evidence, including Greek coin hoards found in steppe settlements, corroborates written accounts of trade and provides precise dating for interactions. Greek sources, particularly Herodotus, note the Scythians' role as intermediaries, regulating access to trade corridors and ensuring the flow of both agricultural and luxury products. Archaeological findings at Olbia and surrounding settlements indicate sustained commercial contact, with Scythian intermediaries often controlling the movement of goods between the steppe interior and Greek urban centers. The organization of trade reflects systemic social and political structures. Elite chieftains exercised oversight of economic activity, regulating tribute, controlling caravan routes, and coordinating seasonal movements to optimize exchange. Kurgan distribution patterns and the concentration of imported goods in elite burials suggest that wealth accumulation through trade was closely tied to political authority. High-status individuals maintained social dominance by managing both material resources and strategic connections to urban centers. This interdependence of economy, governance, and social hierarchy illustrates how trade networks reinforced the broader structure of Scythian society. 3 interpretive insights emerge from Black Sea trade. First, mobility and territorial knowledge provided the logistical foundation for economic dominance, allowing steppe elites to integrate long-distance exchange with pastoral production. Second, elite control over trade strengthened political authority, ensuring that wealth distribution reinforced social hierarchies. Third, trade facilitated cultural and technological exchange, as Greek goods, artistic motifs, and metallurgical techniques were incorporated into Scythian material culture, enhancing both utility and symbolic status. Together, these dynamics underscore the systemic relationship between economy, governance, and cultural expression. Economic networks also supported military ventures. Wealth derived from trade funded the acquisition of weapons, horse breeding, and elite patronage of kurgans and ceremonial activities. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that imported Greek metalwork was often repurposed for weaponry and ceremonial display, indicating the dual economic and military value of exchange. Steppe mobility allowed Scythians to deploy forces rapidly, protect trade routes, and extract tribute from less organized neighbors, demonstrating the functional integration of commerce and coercion. This combination of wealth, mobility, and martial capacity reinforced both internal cohesion and regional influence. Interactions with Greek colonies were not solely economic but also diplomatic. Formalized trade agreements, negotiated tribute, and occasional military alliances highlight the reciprocal nature of Scythian-Greek relations. Archaeological patterns, including fortified settlement layers and imported goods distribution, demonstrate that economic exchange was embedded within a broader strategic framework. Trade facilitated trust, created interdependence, and allowed Scythian elites to leverage material resources to consolidate political power, demonstrating the systemic interplay of commerce, diplomacy, and authority. By the 4th century BCE, the Black Sea trade network had become a central component of Scythian societal stability. Archaeological evidence indicates sustained participation over multiple generations, integrating pastoral production, mobility, and urban interaction into a coherent economic system. Wealth generated through trade reinforced political structures, supported military readiness, and enabled cultural patronage, illustrating the complex interdependence of economic, political, and social factors. Economic success reinforced political structures and military ventures. The combination of pastoral wealth, control over trade corridors, and integration with Greek urban centers allowed Scythian elites to maintain dominance across the Pontic steppe. Trade not only provided material resources but also facilitated cultural exchange, strategic alliances, and social cohesion. This period of economic integration represents a peak in systemic complexity, demonstrating how wealth and mobility combined to sustain Scythian power and influence in the broader Black Sea region. Nomads and city dwellers depended on each other more than they admitted. Throughout the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, Scythian pastoral production and seasonal mobility were intricately linked to the economic life of neighboring Greek colonies, Thracian settlements, and other urban centers bordering the Pontic steppe. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that Scythian elites coordinated the flow of livestock, furs, and other steppe products with Greek imports such as pottery, wine, and metalwork. Burials and kurgans frequently contain both pastoral wealth and imported goods, indicating that economic engagement with sedentary populations was central to political authority and social hierarchy. Anthony, 2007. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Pastoral production formed the foundation of these interactions. Horses, cattle, and sheep were not only vital for subsistence and mobility, but also served as commodities for trade and tribute. Greek colonies relied on these products for transport, agricultural labor, and elite consumption, while Scythian leaders leveraged them to extract material advantage, negotiate alliances, and maintain loyalty among subordinate clans. Numismatic evidence and Greek records confirm that tribute arrangements, often formalized through intermediaries, allowed both sides to benefit from the steppe's resources while ensuring social and political leverage for the Scythian elite. The system of economic integration extended to urban centers and fortified settlements. Archaeological excavations in Olbia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum reveal Scythian influence in trade regulations, storage facilities, and seasonal encampments. Elite oversight of caravans and river routes ensured that goods flowed efficiently between steppe and city, maintaining both supply and control. Concentrations of Greek imports in elite kurgans indicate that participation in trade networks was not egalitarian but closely tied to hierarchical structures, allowing chieftains to consolidate wealth and authority. This integration demonstrates how mobility, economic production, and governance operated as mutually reinforcing components of systemic control. 3 interpretive insights emerge from nomadic sedentary economic interactions. First, pastoral production underpinned both subsistence and long-distance trade, allowing Scythian elites to exert influence over sedentary populations. Second, the regulation of tribute and trade reinforced social hierarchies, linking wealth accumulation directly to political authority. Third, integration with neighboring urban centers facilitated cultural and technological exchange, illustrating that economic entanglement extended beyond material benefit to include the transmission of ideas, motifs, and organizational practices. Together, these dynamics reveal a structured, mutually dependent relationship between nomads and sedentary communities. Economic integration also created strategic advantages and vulnerabilities. Wealth generated through pastoral production and trade-funded military campaigns supported elite patronage of art and ritual, and enabled seasonal mobility across vast territories. At the same time, dependence on Greek colonies and other urban centers created exposure to shifts in political or economic stability. Archaeological evidence of interrupted trade layers, abandoned settlements, and altered burial practices suggests that disruptions, whether from conflict, changing alliances, or environmental factors, could have significant consequences for elite authority and regional control. These patterns demonstrate the dual nature of economic entanglement. It enhanced power but introduced structural risks. By the 4th century BCE, the integration of pastoral production, trade, and tribute with neighboring city-states had become a defining feature of Scythian society. Economic networks reinforced political hierarchy, sustained military readiness, and facilitated cultural expression. Material evidence from settlements, kurgans, and imported artifacts demonstrates that these systems were institutionalized, functioning across multiple generations and maintaining elite control over both nomadic populations and sedentary partners. Economic entanglement created both opportunity and vulnerability. While it allowed Scythian elites to consolidate wealth, authority, and regional influence, it also tied their fortunes to the stability of external partners. Shifts in Greek colonial power, pressure from rival nomadic groups, and environmental changes introduced risks that would later contribute to political fragmentation. Nonetheless, this period illustrates the sophisticated interdependence between steppe nomads and neighboring urban economies, highlighting the systemic foundations of Scythian prosperity and the structural challenges inherent in maintaining control over long-distance exchange networks. Gold and artifacts mapped social hierarchies across the steppe. By the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, Scythian elite kurgans provided a tangible record of wealth distribution, political authority, and social stratification. Excavations at sites such as Pazyryk, Saloka, and Kostromskaya reveal richly furnished tombs containing gold plaques, elaborate weapons, horse trappings, and imported Greek goods. These burials demonstrate that material accumulation was not merely personal luxury, but an instrument of political legitimacy and social cohesion. Jacobson, 1995. Kuzmina, 2007. The spatial arrangement and scale of kurgans indicate a hierarchical society. Larger tombs, often containing multiple human attendants, horses, and substantial wealth, are associated with chieftains or high-ranking warriors, while smaller interments correspond to subordinate members of the clan network. Gold artifacts, intricately decorated with animal-style motifs, served dual functions, marking status and expressing cosmological or ritual significance. Archaeological analysis shows that these objects were produced by skilled artisans under elite patronage, suggesting that control over wealth and craft was a key mechanism for reinforcing political authority across dispersed steppe populations. Wealth concentration extended beyond funerary contexts into everyday life and military capability. Imported Greek metalwork, pottery, and luxury goods found in settlements and seasonal encampments indicate that trade and tribute reinforced elite control. Pastoral wealth, livestock, horses, and furs, provided both sustenance and commodities for exchange, creating a systemic foundation for political and military power. Control over these resources allowed chieftains to mobilize cavalry, conduct raids, and negotiate alliances with neighboring city-states, demonstrating the interdependence of wealth, governance, and coercive capacity. 3 interpretive insights emerge from the study of elite display. First, monumental kurgans and accumulated artifacts codified social hierarchy, visually reinforcing the authority of leaders across broad territories. Second, elite patronage of craft and trade integrated economic, artistic, and ritual systems, illustrating a complex social and cultural infrastructure. Third, the selective integration of imported Greek goods into local practices reflects a strategic appropriation of foreign resources to enhance both political and cultural legitimacy. Together, these patterns highlight the deliberate use of wealth as a mechanism of systemic control. Material culture also served as a medium of communication and identity. Animal-style motifs, horse adornments, and ritual objects conveyed martial prowess, cosmological beliefs, and clan affiliation, making social and political distinctions visible across communities. The distribution of imported goods further reinforced these distinctions, signaling both external connections and internal rank. Archaeologists have observed that the symbolic and material aspects of elite display were closely intertwined, suggesting that Scythian leaders consciously curated a visual and ritual language to maintain cohesion, project authority, and facilitate loyalty among subordinate groups. However, concentration of wealth introduced structural vulnerabilities. Dependence on elite control of trade, pastoral resources, and tribute created potential sources of internal tension and factionalism. External pressures, such as competition with other nomadic groups, Greek colonies shifting allegiances, and emerging centralized states in the region, challenged the sustainability of these wealth-based hierarchies. Archaeological evidence of abandoned or looted kurgans, changes in settlement patterns, and disrupted trade networks indicates that these pressures increasingly constrained elite authority, foreshadowing political fragmentation and eventual decline. As wealth concentrated, so did internal and external pressures. The systemic interplay of material accumulation, political authority, and social hierarchy had enabled the Scythians to dominate the Pontic steppe, but it also created dependencies that would later be exploited or destabilized. Nonetheless, the archaeological record preserves a clear portrait of a society in which economic resources, artistic expression, and political authority were tightly integrated, demonstrating the sophistication and resilience of Scythian governance at the height of their economic power. New nomads from the east challenged the old order of the steppe. Beginning in the 3rd century BCE, Sarmatian groups migrated westward from the Eurasian steppes, gradually encroaching upon Scythian territories across the Pontic region. Archaeological evidence indicates both violent confrontation and displacement. As settlements were abandoned, kurgans show signs of destruction or looting, and weapon caches reveal defensive activity. The Sarmatians, also highly mobile horsemen equipped with heavy cavalry and long lances, introduced new tactical challenges that disrupted the Scythians' previously dominant military system. Koryakova-Epimikov, 2007, Solomursky, 1970. Scythian response to the Sarmatian advance was both strategic and reactive. Defensive measures included the reinforcement of seasonal settlements, temporary fortifications, and concentrated Kurgan burials to protect elite leadership. However, archaeological surveys show that many northern and eastern steppe regions experienced depopulation or restructuring, suggesting that sustained pressure limited the Scythians' capacity to project power across their former territories. Material evidence, including damaged horse harnesses, broken weaponry, and disrupted trade deposits, confirms that conflict significantly affected both elite and pastoral communities. Interpretive analysis reveals three critical insights regarding Sarmatian encroachment. First, the movement of new nomadic groups demonstrates the dynamic nature of steppe demographics, where migration and competition continually reshaped political landscapes. Second, the tactical innovations of Sarmatians, particularly heavily armed cavalry, challenged Scythian military paradigms, illustrating the coevolution of nomadic warfare. Third, the resulting disruption of settlements and trade networks shows that external pressures were not only military, but also economic and social, weakening the systemic cohesion that had sustained Scythian authority for centuries. Economic consequences of Sarmatian pressure were significant. Trade with Greek colonies became less secure, seasonal pastoral movements were disrupted, and the concentration of wealth in elite kurgans could no longer fully compensate for territorial losses. Excavations of Olbia and Chersonesus reveal interruptions in import layers and evidence of diminished tribute, indicating that economic networks critical to elite authority and military provisioning were strained. These disruptions underscore the interdependence of military, economic, and political systems on the steppe and demonstrate how external pressures could accelerate systemic decline. The Sarmatian migration also contributed to cultural transformation. Evidence from later kurgans indicates the blending of Scythian and Sarmatian material traditions, including modified animal style motifs and hybrid burial practices. This suggests that as the Sarmatians established dominance in former Scythian territories, they adopted and adapted local artistic and ritual conventions, reflecting both continuity and transformation in steppe cultural systems. Such syncretism demonstrates that decline was not an abrupt collapse but a gradual integration into emerging social and political orders. By the 2nd century BCE, Scythian control over the Pontic steppe had significantly contracted. Archaeological surveys show that the richest kurgans were concentrated in isolated northern and western regions, while eastern territories experienced sustained Sarmatian settlement. Military pressure, combined with economic disruption and demographic shifts, weakened the centralized authority of Scythian elites, undermining both social hierarchy and long-distance trade networks. The steppe, once dominated by the Scythians, became a contested zone of competing nomadic powers. Military pressure combined with economic shifts accelerated decline. The Sarmatian advance illustrates the systemic vulnerability of a society reliant on mobility, pastoral wealth, and elite oversight. As territories contracted and trade networks faltered, the structural cohesion that had underpinned Scythian power eroded. Kurgan evidence, disrupted settlement patterns, and hybridized material culture collectively document a period of transformation in which the once dominant Scythian order was gradually supplanted by new nomadic dynamics, setting the stage for the final stages of political fragmentation and cultural absorption. Control of trade alone could not sustain empire against changing realities. By the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, the Scythians' dominance over the northern Black Sea began to wane as Greek colonies, such as Olbia, Chersonesus, and Panticapaeum increasingly operated independently. Archaeological evidence indicates that tribute flows decreased and local elites exercised greater autonomy. Numismatic studies reveal reduced Scythian influence over coin circulation, while settlement excavations show abandonment of previously occupied seasonal encampments, reflecting diminished regulatory capacity. Koryakova-Epimikov, 2007, Solomursky, 1970. The decline in economic leverage corresponded with broader shifts in regional power dynamics. Greek colonies, benefiting from strengthened fortifications and internal governance, were able to negotiate trade terms directly, bypassing Scythian intermediaries. Imported goods such as Greek pottery, metalwork, and coinage continued to circulate, but control over distribution was no longer exclusively mediated by Scythian elites. Excavated trade layers indicate that while exchanges persisted, the steppe centrality in these networks had diminished, reflecting a reorientation of economic and political influence toward urban centers rather than nomadic intermediaries. Interpretive analysis highlights three key insights regarding this loss of dominance. First, economic dependence on external partners exposed structural vulnerabilities, demonstrating that wealth and mobility alone could not guarantee sustained authority. Second, shifts in Greek colonial governance illustrate how sedentary states could exploit nomadic reliance on trade to assert autonomy and resist tribute. Third, the contraction of Scythian influence over Black Sea networks underscores the interdependence of military capacity, economic integration, and political authority, revealing how systemic pressures contributed to decline. Settlement abandonment provides further evidence of changing territorial control. Excavations of Scythian seasonal encampments and minor korgons reveal reduced construction and maintenance, indicating that northern Black Sea regions were no longer secure or effectively monitored. Concurrently, elite korgons show fewer imported Greek goods, reflecting disruptions in tribute and exchange. These patterns suggest that both logistical constraints and political fragmentation were factors in the decline of steppe dominance, emphasizing the vulnerability of nomadic polities to external economic and military pressures. Cultural and political consequences accompanied the economic shift. Reduced contact with Greek colonies led to a contraction in material and symbolic exchange, affecting both elite display and social cohesion. Artistic motifs, luxury goods, and ritual practices associated with trade were less frequently incorporated into burials, indicating a weakening of cultural influence alongside economic decline. This period reflects a systemic contraction in Scythian authority, where diminished economic leverage contributed to broader social and political fragmentation. By the 2nd century BCE, the Scythians' loss of control over Black Sea trade marked a turning point in their historical trajectory. Archaeological and numismatic evidence demonstrates that while interactions with Greek colonies continued, they were increasingly on terms dictated by urban centers. Steppe elites retained local authority but lacked the capacity to project influence regionally. This shift presaged the absorption of remaining Scythian groups into emerging Sarmatian and other successor polities, illustrating how external and internal pressures intersected to reshape political structures. Decline in influence foreshadowed assimilation into successor cultures. As economic networks eroded and political authority contracted, Scythian elites were forced to adapt to changing realities. Settlement disruption, diminished trade, and the rise of competing nomadic powers collectively signaled the transition from a dominant steppe society to integration within broader Eurasian cultural and political frameworks. The archaeological record preserves a clear narrative of this process, linking economic contraction to political weakening and foreshadowing the eventual transformation of the Scythian legacy. The once unified horsemen began to disperse across the plains. By the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, internal fragmentation among Scythian clans became increasingly apparent. Archaeological surveys indicate the decline of centralized authority, as elite korgons became smaller, fewer in number, and more regionally confined. Settlements show evidence of partial abandonment or relocation, suggesting westward movement toward the lower Danube and Carpathian regions. This dispersal reflects both pressures from Sarmatian expansion and the erosion of the economic and political networks that had sustained Scythian cohesion. Solomursky, 1970. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Clan fragmentation was facilitated by steppe mobility, which allowed groups to relocate seasonally or permanently in response to environmental, military, or economic pressures. Korgon evidence shows that some communities established smaller, localized burial complexes, signaling reduced interclan coordination and a contraction of elite oversight. The pattern of westward migration also indicates strategic adaptation. Scythian groups sought regions with favorable pasturelands and access to trade routes while avoiding direct confrontation with dominant Sarmatian forces. These movements contributed to the geographic reorganization of steppe populations and the diffusion of Scythian influence into new areas. Interpretive analysis reveals three key insights regarding internal fragmentation. First, the decline of centralized leadership demonstrates the interdependence of political authority, economic integration, and military capacity. When one component faltered, the system became increasingly unstable. Second, westward migration illustrates the adaptive flexibility of nomadic societies, showing how mobility allowed populations to survive even under external pressure. Third, cultural absorption and hybridization with neighboring groups, particularly the Sarmatians, underscore the dynamic nature of steppe societies, where identity and material culture evolved in response to shifting political and social landscapes. Material culture provides evidence of integration and adaptation. Hybridized kurgans, combining Scythian and Sarmatian burial practices, indicate that dispersed Scythian groups maintained aspects of their cultural identity while incorporating elements of dominant neighboring populations. Animal-style motifs persisted in modified forms, and Greek imported goods continued to appear, albeit in smaller quantities and less consistently. These patterns suggest that cultural practices were both resilient and malleable, allowing Scythian traditions to endure even as political cohesion dissipated. Migration also facilitated contact with new populations across Eastern and Central Europe. Archaeological evidence from the Lower Danube, Carpathians, and Pannonian steppe indicates the presence of Scythian-style weaponry, horse trappings, and ornaments alongside local artifacts. These findings demonstrate the integration of Scythian material culture into broader regional contexts, reflecting both continuity and transformation. Interaction with local populations contributed to the gradual assimilation of Scythian groups into emerging steppe polities, including Sarmatian confederations, while preserving aspects of steppe nomadic identity. By the 1st century BCE, the Scythians had largely ceased to function as a unified political entity. Fragmented clans, dispersed across multiple regions, maintained cultural practices within hybridized frameworks, but no longer commanded the centralized authority that had defined the Pontic steppe for centuries. Archaeological evidence suggests continuity in ritual, artistry, and mobility, but these elements were increasingly subordinated to the political and military dominance of Sarmatians and other nomadic groups. Yet Scythian culture persisted in hybridized forms. Burial practices, artistic motifs, and pastoral traditions continued to influence the material culture of successor populations. Greek sources, such as later Roman and Byzantine accounts, reference the persistence of Scythian-style horsemanship, weaponry, and ornamentation in various steppe and Danubian contexts. These remnants reflect both the resilience of cultural identity and the process of transformation, illustrating how the Scythians' legacy endured despite the collapse of political cohesion and territorial control. Even in decline, the Scythians remained partners in empire. From the 3rd century BCE onward, many Scythian groups came under the political and economic influence of the Bosporan Kingdom, a Hellenistic state centered around the Cimmerian Bosporus. Archaeological and numismatic evidence indicates active participation in Bosporan trade, military ventures, and political networks. Excavations of Bosporan settlements, such as Panticapaeum, reveal Scythian presence in garrison sites, fortified positions, and seasonal camps, suggesting integration into Hellenistic administrative and military structures. Kuzmina, 2007, Brond, 1994. Economic interaction with the Bosporan Kingdom included adoption of Greek coinage, which facilitated both trade and tribute. Scythian elites acquired and circulated silver and bronze coins, participating in regional markets that extended from the Black Sea to the steppe interior. Material evidence from kurgans and settlements demonstrates that imported Greek goods, pottery, metalwork, and luxury items continued to circulate among Scythian groups, although now often under the oversight of Bosporan authorities. This integration highlights how former steppe polities adapted to Hellenistic systems while retaining elements of their traditional social and military organization. Joint military ventures provide further evidence of cooperation. Scythians served as cavalry auxiliaries in Bosporan campaigns, and were documented in contemporary sources as participating in both defensive and offensive operations along the northern Black Sea. Archaeological analysis of weaponry and horse trappings suggests continuity in steppe martial practices, adapted to complement Greek-style infantry and fortifications. These collaborative ventures illustrate the practical and strategic integration of nomadic mobility with Hellenistic state structures, allowing Scythians to maintain martial relevance despite territorial contraction. 3 interpretive insights emerge from Bosporan interaction. First, political subordination did not eliminate Scythian agency. Elite clans retained internal authority while engaging in cooperative ventures with the Bosporan kingdom. Second, participation in Hellenistic trade and military networks facilitated economic and social adaptation, illustrating the flexibility of steppe nomadic structures in response to changing regional hierarchies. Third, the circulation of Greek coinage and material culture represents a selective adoption of foreign systems to maintain both wealth and prestige, demonstrating a pragmatic approach to integration. Together, these dynamics reflect the systemic adaptation of Scythian society within a broader Hellenistic framework. Cultural evidence highlights the blending of steppe and Hellenistic traditions. Artistic motifs, including animal-style decoration, continued to appear in modified forms alongside Greek stylistic elements. Funerary practices, while retaining key steppe features such as horse interments, incorporated Bosporan ceramics, imported luxury goods, and elements of Hellenistic ritual. These hybridized forms underscore both continuity and transformation, revealing that cultural identity persisted through adaptation and integration rather than isolation or complete assimilation. By the 2nd century BCE, the Scythians' relationship with the Bosporan kingdom had become a defining feature of their late-stage social organization. Settlement patterns indicate permanent and seasonal camps positioned near strategic trade routes and fortified urban centers. Material evidence, including kurgans containing Bosporan coinage and imported artifacts, reflects the dual role of Scythian elites as intermediaries in commerce and contributors to military and political endeavors. Integration was thus multidimensional, encompassing economic, martial, and cultural systems. Cultural blending left enduring marks on art and society. Hybridized burial practices, adapted martial equipment, and continued circulation of imported goods indicate that Scythian identity persisted in modified form. Archaeological evidence demonstrates that while the steppe lost political independence, its social and cultural structures were resilient, influencing both the Bosporan kingdom and emerging Sarmatian polities. This period illustrates the capacity of Scythian society to adapt to new political realities while preserving core elements of mobility, hierarchy, and material culture. Art preserved identity even as power waned. In the late Scythian period, material culture reflects a complex synthesis of steppe traditions with Greek and Persian influences. Excavated kurgans, settlements, and burial sites contain gold plaques, jewelry, horse trappings, ceramics, and textiles that combine traditional animal-style motifs with Hellenistic figural representation and Persian ornamental forms. Sites in Crimea, the Kuban region, and along the lower Dnieper demonstrate that elite Scythians selectively adopted foreign artistic elements while maintaining symbolic markers of clan affiliation, mobility, and cosmology. Jacobson, 1995. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Gold work exemplifies the hybridization of motifs. Traditional predatory animals, stags, griffins, and felines, are integrated with Greek ornamental patterns and Persian decorative elements, producing artifacts that functioned as both status symbols and ritual objects. Kurgans often contain these items alongside imported ceramics or coins, illustrating the interconnectedness of artistic expression, economic exchange, and social hierarchy. The preservation of animal-style elements underscores a conscious effort to retain steppe identity, even as elites engaged with Hellenistic and Persianized networks. Ceramics and textiles reveal complementary cultural blending. Imported Greek pottery coexisted with locally produced vessels that incorporated foreign stylistic features, while textile fragments demonstrate patterned weaving and ornamentation influenced by Mediterranean and Near Eastern techniques. These hybrid materials served practical and symbolic purposes, reinforcing elite status, facilitating trade, and expressing continuity of steppe cosmology and ritual practice. Archaeological analysis of workshop debris and production techniques indicates both local innovation and selective imitation, highlighting the adaptive strategies of Scythian artisans and patrons. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this period of hybrid material culture. First, artistic synthesis reflects resilience of cultural identity, demonstrating that Scythians preserved symbolic and ritual continuity despite political decline. Second, integration of foreign motifs indicates strategic engagement with Hellenistic and Persian cultural networks, reinforcing social status and political alliances. Third, material hybridization reveals the dual function of art as both communication and negotiation, enabling elites to assert authority internally while participating in broader regional systems. Together, these patterns illustrate the systemic role of material culture in mediating social, political, and economic relationships. Hybridization also reflects broader social and political realities. As the Scythian political structure fragmented, cultural continuity provided a stabilizing element within dispersed clans. Art and material culture became markers of shared identity, transmitting values, cosmological beliefs, and elite prerogatives across geographically separated groups. Evidence from the lower Danube, Crimea, and Kuban indicates that while political cohesion diminished, cultural networks persisted through objects, ritual practices, and stylistic conventions, enabling dispersed communities to maintain a collective sense of heritage. By the 1st century BCE, these hybrid artistic forms represented the final stage of distinct Scythian culture. Kurgan burials, artifacts, and settlement evidence indicate continuity in ritual and social hierarchy, but integration with Hellenistic and Persian elements reflects the absorption of Scythian groups into broader Eurasian networks. Material culture thus serves as both an archive and a lens, revealing the ways in which Scythians negotiated identity, authority, and influence during the terminal phase of their historical presence. Hybridization marked the final cultural stage before disappearance as a distinct polity. The persistence of steppe motifs within a Hellenistic Persian framework demonstrates the adaptability and resilience of Scythian identity, even as centralized authority and territorial control were lost. Archaeological evidence preserves a tangible record of cultural continuity amid political transformation, illustrating how art, ritual, and material production enabled the Scythians to leave an enduring legacy across the Black Sea and Eurasian steppe regions. The steppe riders lived on in stories as much as in graves. Despite political decline and territorial contraction, the Scythians' presence was preserved in historical accounts, material culture, and oral traditions. Herodotus, writing in the 5th century BCE, provides detailed descriptions of Scythian customs, warfare, and burial practices, offering insight into steppe nomad society from an external perspective. Later Roman authors, including Strabo and Pliny the Elder, also recorded Scythian martial prowess, social structure, and interactions with neighboring powers, demonstrating the enduring impression of the Scythians on classical observers. Herodotus, Histories 4.71 to 4.93. Strabo, Geographica 11.2.2. Archaeological evidence complements textual accounts, preserving physical traces of Scythian life, ritual, and art. Kurgan burials, goldwork, ceramics, and hybridized artifacts from the Black Sea region and Eurasian steppe provide material corroboration of practices described in classical sources. These finds allow modern scholars to verify, contextualize, and expand upon written records, offering a more precise understanding of social hierarchy, economic networks, and cultural identity. For example, the Pazyryk mummies of the Altai demonstrate preserved clothing, tattoos, and funerary items consistent with descriptions of Scythian customs. Bridging Textual and Material Evidence, Jacobson, 1995, Kuzmina, 2007. Interpretive analysis reveals 3 key insights regarding the preservation of Scythian memory. First, external documentation reflects both observation and interpretation. Greek and Roman authors often emphasized martial or exotic aspects of steppe life, yet their accounts provide chronological and cultural anchors for archaeological correlation. Second, the persistence of Scythian motifs and practices in hybridized contexts illustrates how cultural memory outlasted political structures, enabling traditions to influence successor societies, including Sarmatian and Bosporan communities. Third, material culture serves as an active conduit of historical memory, enabling modern scholarship to reconstruct social, economic, and ritual systems with a high degree of accuracy. Historical memory was reinforced through continuity in funerary and artistic practices. Even as centralized authority dissipated, burial traditions maintained symbolic structures that signaled clan affiliation, status, and cosmological beliefs. Hybridized kurgans and imported artifacts recorded both continuity and adaptation, offering a layered perspective on the ways Scythians negotiated identity during periods of decline and integration. These physical markers functioned as enduring testimony to the organization, values, and social hierarchies of steppe society, preserving a historical record beyond written narratives. By combining textual sources with material evidence, scholars can trace the evolution of Scythian society, from early tribal confederations to late-stage integration with Hellenistic polities. Numismatic studies, settlement analysis, and artifact typologies provide detailed chronological frameworks, while classical accounts offer context for political interactions, warfare, and diplomacy. This dual perspective ensures a comprehensive understanding of Scythian legacy, demonstrating how steppe societies influenced regional dynamics across centuries despite the absence of enduring state structures. The enduring memory shaped how the world remembered them. Through the lens of Greek, Roman, and later Byzantine authors, the Scythians were depicted as archetypal steppe nomads, mobile, martial, and enigmatic. Yet material culture complicates and enriches this perception, showing sophisticated art, economic integration, and political adaptability. Archaeological and textual evidence together reveal a civilization whose impact extended far beyond its political lifespan, influencing subsequent nomadic confederations, trade networks, and artistic traditions across Eurasia. By the end of the first millennium BCE, Scythian memory persisted not only in stories and classical histories, but also in the tangible record of graves, artifacts, and hybridized cultural practices. Their social, economic, and artistic systems provided a foundation for emerging steppe polities, ensuring that while the Scythians ceased to exist as a unified polity, their legacy endured across both space and time. Successors of the steppe learned from the masters of horses and bows. Even after the decline of Scythian political authority, their military strategies, mobility, and clan-based social organization served as templates for subsequent nomadic societies, including the Sarmatians, Alans, and later Huns. Archaeological and historical evidence indicates continuity in cavalry tactics, composite bow use, horse breeding, and steppe raiding strategies, demonstrating that Scythian innovations remained highly influential across Eurasia. Solomursky, 1970. Koryakova-Epimikov, 2007. Steppe mobility was central to Scythian influence. Their seasonal migrations, rapid redeployment of forces, and ability to sustain pastoral economies underpinned military dominance and political cohesion. These practices were later adopted by Sarmatian confederations, who emulated Scythian cavalry formations and seasonal settlement patterns. Excavated weapon caches and horse gear from Sarmatian sites display clear technological and stylistic continuities, including composite bows, scale armor, and saddle design derived from Scythian prototypes. These features illustrate the transfer of military knowledge and underscore the systemic impact of Scythian organization on subsequent nomadic societies. Clan structures also informed later steppe political organization. Scythian social hierarchies, based on chieftains, subordinate warriors, and interclan alliances, provided a model for governance among Sarmatians and Huns. The kurgan system, in which elites maintained authority through wealth, ritual, and symbolic display, influenced successor burial practices and social signaling. By codifying authority through both material culture and kinship networks, Scythians demonstrated a resilient framework for steppe governance, combining mobility with hierarchical control. Interpretive analysis reveals three key insights regarding Scythian influence on later nomads. First, military innovation was not limited to equipment. It encompassed tactical doctrine, organizational structure, and coordinated mobility, which became standard for Eurasian steppe warfare. Second, clan-based political systems provided an enduring template for decentralized yet cohesive governance among mobile populations. Third, elite wealth and symbolic display continued to serve as mechanisms for legitimacy and social cohesion, illustrating the interplay between material culture, politics, and identity that shaped steppe polities for centuries. Evidence from archaeological sites across the Pontic and Eurasian steppes confirms these continuities. Sarmatian graves frequently include gold plaques and weaponry reflecting Scythian motifs, while Hunnic burials exhibit cavalry equipment and martial strategies consistent with steppe traditions established by the Scythians. Comparative analysis of kurgans and settlement patterns demonstrates the replication of Scythian organizational principles, highlighting the long-term impact of Scythian culture on the structural evolution of steppe societies. Cultural memory also reinforced these influences. Greek and Roman sources repeatedly reference Scythian martial skills, horsemanship, and steppe governance as exemplary. These external perceptions shaped how later nomadic groups were both documented and understood, creating a feedback loop in which Scythian strategies and social norms were validated and emulated. Steppe polities did not simply inherit technology. They inherited a systemic model of warfare, governance, and social hierarchy, demonstrating the deep and lasting imprint of Scythian society. Cultural and technological influence transcended political decline. While the Scythians ceased to exist as a unified polity by the 1st century BCE, their innovations in cavalry warfare, mobility, clan governance, and elite signaling became embedded in the practices of Sarmatians, Huns, Alans, and other steppe peoples. Archaeological and textual evidence collectively demonstrates that the strategic and social frameworks developed by the Scythians provided a durable foundation for the organization and success of subsequent nomadic empires across Eurasia. By the late 1st millennium BCE, the steppe's landscape had been reshaped by the legacy of the Scythians. Successor groups continued to refine and adapt Scythian strategies, demonstrating the enduring value of mobility, martial expertise, and hierarchical social organization. This systemic continuity illustrates that even in the absence of political control, Scythian culture and innovation persisted, influencing both material and institutional development across Eurasian nomadic societies. Gold and beasts shaped aesthetics for centuries. The Scythians' animal style art, expressed in gold plaques, jewelry, weapon decorations, and horse trappings, had a profound and enduring impact on steppe and neighboring societies. Excavated artifacts from the Pontic steppe, Crimea, and the lower Danube reveal the dissemination of Scythian motifs into Sarmatian, Alan, and later nomadic art forms. Stylized depictions of predators, stags, and mythical hybrids not only served as status symbols and ritual objects but also became templates for visual identity across Eurasian nomadic cultures. Jacobson, 1995. Koryakova Epimikov, 2007. Religious practices similarly influenced successor groups. Scythian burial rituals, including horse sacrifices, kurgan interments, and symbolic deposition of wealth, were emulated by Sarmatians and Alans. Kurgans containing ritual deposits, hybridized with Scythian motifs, demonstrate continuity of cosmological and social principles. These practices preserved steppe concepts of ancestry, clan identity, and spiritual authority, while integrating regional influences from Greek, Persian, and Hellenistic contexts. Material and ritual continuity illustrates the systemic role of religion in maintaining social cohesion even as political structures changed. Interpretive analysis highlights three significant aspects of this legacy. First, animal-style art functioned as a durable visual language, communicating power, affiliation, and religious symbolism across nomadic and sedentary societies. Second, ritual practices encoded social hierarchy and cosmology, ensuring that core Scythian values persisted through migration, cultural blending, and assimilation. Third, both art and religion served as vehicles of cultural transmission, influencing not only steppe successors but also neighboring sedentary polities through trade, warfare, and diplomacy. These insights underscore the integrated nature of material culture and spiritual life in sustaining historical memory. Evidence of artistic influence extends across Eurasia. Sarmatian burials contain gold plaques and weapon ornamentation directly referencing Scythian motifs, while Alan settlements show adapted forms of animal depictions on metalwork and leatherwork. Greek and Roman sources, observing these practices centuries later, acknowledged stylistic continuity, often noting the persistence of barbarian horsemanship and ornamentation. Archaeological stratigraphy further demonstrates that these motifs remained part of local visual culture for centuries, illustrating a durable artistic and ideological legacy beyond political decline. Ritual and religious practices also facilitated cultural cohesion. By maintaining kurgan interment and symbolic deposition of wealth, Scythian-influenced groups preserved mechanisms for asserting clan authority, mediating intergroup relations, and demonstrating elite prestige. Hybridized burials incorporating Scythian, Sarmatian, and local elements reflect the adaptive integration of ritual while sustaining core cosmological principles. Such continuity allowed dispersed nomadic populations to retain cultural identity in the absence of centralized political control. The systemic impact of Scythian art and religion is evident in both continuity and adaptation. Motifs, techniques, and ritual forms were not static. They evolved to suit the material, environmental, and political contexts of successor societies. This demonstrates a deliberate and pragmatic approach to cultural inheritance, where aesthetic and spiritual systems provided stability, legitimacy, and identity amid the broader transformations of the Eurasian steppe. From material culture to oral tradition, Scythians left tangible legacies. Their visual language, ritual practices, and cosmological frameworks continued to shape nomadic societies long after the decline of centralized steppe authority. Artifacts, burial practices, and motifs preserved across centuries testify to a culture whose influence extended beyond immediate political control, providing a foundation for subsequent steppe polities and influencing the aesthetic and spiritual imagination of Eurasian peoples. Studying the steppe riders reveals the mechanics of history itself. The Scythians provide one of the earliest and most thoroughly documented examples of nomadic sedentary interaction in Eurasia. Analysis of their political organization, military strategies, economic networks, and cultural practices offers insight into the systemic dynamics that shaped steppe societies and their relations with sedentary civilizations. Greek historians, including Herodotus, alongside archaeological evidence from kurgans, settlements, and material culture, allow scholars to reconstruct the complexities of these interactions with precision and analytical depth. Herodotus, Histories 4.71 to 4.93, Kuzmina, 2007. The study of Scythian society illuminates the interdependence of mobility, warfare, and trade. Their cavalry tactics, seasonal migrations, and clan-based hierarchies exemplify how nomadic polities could project power across vast territories without permanent urban centers. At the same time, economic engagement with Greek colonies and the Bosporan Kingdom illustrates the mechanisms through which mobile societies integrated with sedentary trade networks, exchanging horses, furs, and luxury goods for coinage and crafted items. This duality provides a framework for understanding Eurasian trade dynamics, demonstrating that steppe societies were not isolated but actively shaped regional economies. 3 interpretive insights arise from the historiographical study of the Scythians. First, their social and military systems highlight the adaptability of nomadic societies, showing how decentralized authority and clan cohesion enabled sustained political and military influence. Second, the interaction between Scythians and neighboring civilizations exemplifies the balance of conflict, diplomacy, and cultural exchange, revealing patterns that persisted across successive steppe empires. Third, material culture, including animal style art, kurgan architecture, and hybridized artifacts, provides empirical data that complements classical texts, allowing modern historians to evaluate bias, corroborate accounts, and construct a nuanced understanding of steppe civilization. The Scythians also offer a case study in historiographical methodology. Greek and Roman sources often emphasized exoticism or martial prowess, creating a perception of the Scythians as archetypal nomads. Comparative archaeological evidence, however, demonstrates the sophistication of their governance, economy, and cultural expression. This juxtaposition highlights the importance of integrating textual and material sources to mitigate bias and reconstruct systemic historical realities. It also underscores how the study of nomadic societies challenges traditional frameworks centered on sedentary civilizations, expanding the scope of early Eurasian history. By examining Scythian influence on successor populations, scholars trace continuities in military strategy, artistic production, and ritual practice. The persistence of Kurgan burial traditions, steppe motifs, and pastoral networks among Sarmatians, Alans, and later Huns illustrates the long-term impact of Scythian innovations. Historiographical study reveals that understanding these continuities is essential to interpreting the evolution of Eurasian nomadic polities and their integration with settled states, as well as the diffusion of cultural, technological, and economic systems across the steppe. Finally, the Scythians provide insight into broader questions of historical causality and societal adaptation. Their rise and decline demonstrate the interplay of geography, resource management, external pressures, and internal cohesion. Trade, warfare, and mobility were not isolated phenomena but components of a systemic network that determined political power and cultural influence. Analysis of Scythian society thus informs modern understanding of how steppe polities functioned, adapted, and interacted with sedentary civilizations over centuries. Legacy merges with modern historical understanding. The combined study of classical accounts, archaeological evidence, and material culture situates the Scythians as a foundational case in Eurasian history. They exemplify the mechanisms of nomadic influence on empire, trade, and culture, and their historiographical record continues to shape scholarship on the steppe and its integration with the wider ancient world. Through rigorous academic investigation, the Scythians illuminate the structural dynamics of history itself, providing enduring lessons on adaptation, resilience, and cultural transmission. From Kurgans to Greek texts, the story of the Scythians is a mirror of the steppe itself. The historical trajectory of the Scythians illustrates the interplay of geography, economy, military innovation, and culture in shaping nomadic societies. Originating in the Eurasian steppe around the 9th to 8th centuries BCE, Scythian groups organized into clan-based confederations, exploiting vast grasslands for pastoralism, horse breeding, and seasonal mobility. Archaeological evidence, including early kurgans and weapon caches, demonstrates that even in these formative stages, patterns of social hierarchy, economic organization, and martial preparedness were established, laying the foundation for centuries of influence. Solomursky, 1970. Koryakova-Pimikov, 2007. The early development of political structures was shaped by the environment of the Pontic and Eurasian steppes. Clan alliances, chieftain authority, and coordinated raids reflect a balance between decentralization and collective action. Herodotus describes these structures as fluid yet effective, capable of mobilizing forces for both defense and offense. Steppe mobility facilitated economic flexibility, allowing Scythians to engage with Greek colonies, trade in horses, furs, and metalwork, and integrate selectively into Hellenistic and Persian economic networks. This systemic interaction of environment, social organization, and economy demonstrates how nomadic societies could sustain power without permanent urban centers. The Scythians' peak influence emerged during the 5th to 4th centuries BCE, when control of the northern Black Sea, dominance over trade routes, and martial superiority allowed them to consolidate wealth, status, and cultural expression. Kurgans of this period, such as those found in Pazyryk and Crimea, contain elaborate goldwork, imported Greek goods, and evidence of ritual practice, reflecting sophisticated social hierarchy and integration of cultural motifs. Military mobility, mastery of cavalry tactics, and coordination among clans enabled the projection of power across the steppe while maintaining economic and political cohesion. This phase illustrates the interdependence of economic resources, martial capability, and social organization in sustaining peak influence. Decline followed as external pressures, particularly from Sarmatian migrations, disrupted traditional steppe territories. Archaeological and textual evidence reveals gradual loss of control over trade routes, fragmented political authority, and westward dispersal of clans. Hybridized cultural forms, such as modified kurgans and integration with Hellenistic and Persian material culture, demonstrate both adaptation and diminution of centralized authority. While military and economic dominance waned, social and ritual continuity persisted, preserving Scythian identity and influencing successor nomadic societies. The Scythians' enduring legacy is multifaceted. Steppe military strategies, clan structures, and mobility informed Sarmatian, Alan, and Hunnic organization, while artistic and ritual traditions, including animal style art and kurgan interments, were preserved and adapted across Eurasia. Greek and Roman historical accounts further ensured that Scythian social and martial practices were recorded, providing frameworks for understanding nomadic sedentary interaction. Archaeological evidence corroborates these textual accounts, demonstrating systemic cultural and technological continuity despite political decline. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this synthesis. First, geography was a decisive factor shaping mobility, economic opportunity, and military tactics. Second, the integration of economy, social hierarchy, and military innovation enabled sustained influence even in the absence of urban centers or formal state structures. Third, cultural and ritual practices provided mechanisms for identity preservation, enabling dispersed groups to maintain cohesion and influence across generations. Collectively, these factors demonstrate that Scythian history cannot be understood solely through political chronology. It requires analysis of systemic interactions across multiple dimensions. The study of the Scythians also contextualizes Eurasian history more broadly. Their interactions with Greek colonies, Persian empires, and later nomadic polities illustrate the dynamic feedback between mobile and sedentary societies. Trade, diplomacy, and warfare were interconnected processes, shaped by material, environmental, and cultural constraints. By tracing the Scythian arc from origins to legacy, scholars gain insight into the mechanisms of political rise and decline, the transfer of technology and art, and the persistence of cultural identity within the broader Eurasian context. Understanding the Scythians contextualizes Eurasian history. Their trajectory exemplifies the systemic causes of nomadic power, the adaptive strategies enabling long-distance mobility, and the enduring cultural and technological influence on both steppe and sedentary societies. The Scythians' history serves as a lens through which the dynamics of Eurasian civilization, trade, warfare, migration, and cultural transmission can be analyzed with clarity and precision. By synthesizing archaeological, textual, and material evidence, the Scythian narrative emerges as a case study in historical causality. Geography, economy, military innovation, and cultural continuity interlocked to produce a civilization whose influence extended far beyond its political lifespan. This integrated perspective demonstrates how nomadic societies shaped Eurasian history and how their legacy persists in the structures, art, and traditions of successor polities. Buried treasures speak louder than words across millennia. The Scythians left an extensive material record that continues to illuminate their social structure, economy, artistry, and ritual practices. Kurgan burials, the most visible and studied of these remains, contain human interments accompanied by horses, weapons, goldwork, and imported artifacts. Excavations across the Pontic steppe, Crimea, and Siberia, particularly at Pazyryk, have preserved textiles, tattooed mummies, and complex funerary assemblages, offering unparalleled insight into steppe life from the early Iron Age through the Hellenistic period. Jacobson, 1995. Kuzmina, 2007. Goldwork represents one of the most distinctive aspects of the Scythian legacy. Animal style motifs, depicting stags, felines, birds of prey, and hybrid creatures, adorned personal ornaments, horse harnesses, and ceremonial objects. These items signify both social hierarchy and ritual significance. The craftsmanship, distribution, and contextual placement of these artifacts demonstrate that Scythian elites used material culture to assert authority, communicate identity, and perform religious duties. Archaeological analysis of workshops, stylistic variants, and regional influences reveals both local innovation and selective adaptation of Greek and Persian motifs, highlighting the dynamic cultural synthesis of the period. Pasiric mummies provide extraordinary preservation of organic material, including textiles, woodwork, and leather. Analysis of clothing, horse gear, and tattooed human remains reveals information about social status, daily life, and belief systems. For example, the intricate tattoos found on Scythian elites depict mythological and animalistic imagery consistent with burial offerings, reinforcing continuity between material culture, religious practice, and social hierarchy. These findings also allow scholars to reconstruct steppe diets, pastoral strategies, and mobility patterns, connecting physical evidence to the broader systemic structures that supported Scythian society. Archaeological evidence further demonstrates interaction with sedentary societies. Greek pottery, coinage, and imported luxury goods found in kurgans illustrate long-distance trade, diplomacy, and cultural exchange. The placement of these items alongside traditional Scythian artifacts underscores the integration of external influences while maintaining steppe cultural identity. Similarly, fortified seasonal settlements near Greek colonies reveal practical and strategic adaptations, reflecting a nuanced relationship between nomadic mobility and urbanized neighbors. 3 interpretive insights emerge from this archaeological record. First, material culture functions as a repository of systemic knowledge, preserving social, economic, and ritual information beyond textual sources. Second, the integration of imported and indigenous elements demonstrates the Scythians' adaptive strategies in negotiating identity, status, and political influence. Third, the physical record confirms historical accounts, such as those of Herodotus, while also challenging and refining classical perceptions, offering a more precise and empirically grounded understanding of Scythian civilization. The enduring cultural record extends beyond elite artifacts. Everyday tools, weaponry, and domestic items reveal patterns of subsistence, mobility, and economic organization. Pastoral equipment, arrowheads, and horse gear indicate logistical strategies enabling long-range raiding, trade, and seasonal settlement. These artifacts document systemic interactions between environment, economy, and military capability, demonstrating that the success of Scythian society was rooted in practical adaptation as much as in ritual and symbolic expression. These records inform both scholarship and public fascination. Kurgans, mummies, and gold treasures have provided generations of researchers with empirical data to reconstruct the political, economic, and cultural systems of the Scythians. Simultaneously, they capture the imagination of wider audiences, offering tangible links to a civilization once dominant across the Eurasian steppe. By combining textual, material, and environmental evidence, modern scholarship reconstructs a nuanced understanding of Scythian society, its rise and decline, and its enduring influence on Eurasian history. In conclusion, the archaeological and cultural record ensures that the Scythians continue to communicate across millennia. Kurgans, goldwork, Pasiric mummies, and hybridized artifacts preserve a systemic vision of steppe life, illustrating the interplay of mobility, hierarchy, ritual, and artistry. These tangible legacies allow scholars and the public alike to engage with the Scythians as a coherent civilization, providing enduring insight into their society and ensuring that their historical presence remains a central subject of Eurasian studies. The steppe riders continue to teach us how history moves, not just in cities, but on open plains. The study of the Scythians demonstrates that nomadic societies were not peripheral to historical development. Rather, they were active agents shaping political, economic, and cultural networks across Eurasia. Modern scholarship emphasizes the need to integrate textual sources, material evidence, and environmental context to understand the complexity of steppe societies. Classical accounts, such as those by Herodotus, provide valuable chronological and cultural frameworks, Yet archaeological discoveries, including kurgans, Pazyryk mummies, and animal-style artifacts, offer empirical data to refine and sometimes challenge these narratives. Jacobson, 1995, Solomirsky, 1970. The Scythians illustrate systemic patterns that inform broader understanding of nomadic sedentary dynamics. Their mobility, clan structures, and pastoral economies facilitated both conflict and trade with urbanized neighbors. The integration of Greek imports, Persian motifs, and local traditions into Scythian material culture demonstrates adaptive strategies that allowed nomads to thrive in diverse geopolitical environments. Comparative studies with Sarmatians, Huns, and later steppe confederations reveal recurring patterns in warfare, diplomacy, and cultural transmission, underscoring the Scythians' role as a reference point for interpreting steppe history over centuries. Interpretive analysis yields 3 critical lessons for modern scholarship. First, historical reconstruction benefits from a multi-source methodology, combining written accounts with material and environmental evidence to overcome bias or incompleteness. Second, the study of nomadic societies challenges conventional frameworks that prioritize urban centers, highlighting the importance of mobility, pastoral economies, and decentralized authority in shaping historical processes. Third, cultural, technological, and ritual practices can endure long after political decline, demonstrating how identity and influence persist across generations and geographies. Ongoing discoveries continue to expand understanding of Scythian society. Recent excavations in the Altai, Crimea, and Pontic steppe have unearthed previously unknown kurgans, textiles, and artifacts, refining chronological models and revealing regional variation. Scientific analyses, such as isotopic studies of diet, DNA studies of population movements, and advanced imaging of mummies, provide increasingly precise reconstructions of mobility, kinship, and health. These methods enhance understanding of steppe dynamics, offering deeper insight into how Scythians adapted to environmental constraints, engaged with neighbors, and maintained social cohesion. The historiographical implications are equally significant. Classical narratives often framed Scythians as exotic or barbarian, emphasizing martial prowess at the expense of social and economic sophistication. Integrating archaeological evidence enables scholars to challenge these stereotypes, reconstructing a more nuanced understanding of governance, trade, artistry, and religious life. The interplay between textual bias and material reality demonstrates the importance of critical methodologies in the study of ancient nomadic societies and highlights the Scythians as a model for interpreting complex, non-urban civilizations. Cross-cultural interactions observed in Scythian history inform modern approaches to Eurasian studies. Trade with Greek colonies, diplomatic relations with Persia, and later integration with Hellenistic polities illustrate the fluidity of political and economic boundaries on the steppe. Material culture, from hybridized art to imported coinage, documents the selective adoption and adaptation of foreign elements, offering a template for understanding cultural transmission in other contexts. By analyzing these processes, historians can identify mechanisms through which mobile societies influence and are influenced by settled civilizations. As we study the Scythians, we understand the continuity of human civilization. Their story reinforces that history is not solely urban or sedentary. It also unfolds in open landscapes, along trade corridors, and through mobile networks of people, ideas, and technologies. The integration of environmental adaptation, martial innovation, economic strategy, and ritual practice illustrates a systemic approach to historical agency. Lessons drawn from the Scythians remain relevant for studying the interactions, adaptations, and long-term legacies of nomadic societies worldwide. In conclusion, the Scythians exemplify the ways in which nomadic cultures shape history, influence neighboring societies, and leave enduring legacies in material, cultural, and historiographical records. Ongoing archaeological research, interdisciplinary analysis, and critical engagement with textual sources continue to refine our understanding, ensuring that the steppe writers remain a central case study for scholars of Eurasia and for anyone seeking to comprehend the dynamics of human civilization beyond urban centers. The the story of the Scythians is far from silent. Every kurgan, artifact, and ancient text continues to speak across centuries, offering insights into mobility, culture, and human adaptation. If this journey through the Eurasian steppes sparked your curiosity, explore further. Examine the kurgans of Crimea, study Pazyryk textiles, or read the accounts of Herodotus firsthand. Share your thoughts in the comments. Which aspect of Scythian life, their art, warfare, or trade, most fascinates you? Join the conversation and help keep the history of the steppe alive for future generations.